My British Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 451 Negotiation. However, under the command of the Marquis of Edinburgh, the 12 iron cannons ignited the gunpowder primer, and then immediately ejected 12 stones with a diameter of about 1 foot, shooting towards the city of Rennes. While the Marquis of Edinburgh was hoarse, he held the rapier in his right hand, raised it above his head, and swung it down vigorously, with great momentum on the side. The other cavalry companies, infantry commanders, and adjutants looked at such a majestic movement, and they cooperated with each other with expressions of admiration and applauded loudly. Boom, boom. However, what is embarrassing is that the stone did not hit the city wall, but most of it fell into the moat, splashing a large amount of water. Not mud. Boom, boom. Instead of the expected voice, another voice appeared. Seeing this, the Marquis of Edinburgh moved his lips in embarrassment, glanced sideways at the trembling artillery commander, then looked straight ahead, and coughed, ahem. And this position is still too far away. Move it a little further. Everyone did a good job in this test. It turns out that Lord Marquis is trying to shoot. Everyone couldn't help but suddenly realize, but there are still smart people who know the truth, but it is inconvenient to say it clearly. The moat water, which was originally dirty and full of garbage, splashed on the city wall at once, and some mixture of feces and urine stuck to the city wall. It was black and yellow, which made people sick to see. At this time, it was June, and the temperature in France had reached about 30 degrees. This kind of sourness spread throughout the city wall. Ouch, I can't do it. Oh my God. God, please bless me. The soldiers guarding the city wall were shocked by the menacing artillery of the British at first, but in a blink of an eye, these stone artillery fell into the moat again, making them all laugh out loud. However, the laughter didn't last long, and the air they breathed was filled with a disgusting smell of smoke, which was like defecating in a hut that had existed for decades. In such a situation, the faces of the soldiers suddenly changed. They covered their noses, and hurriedly backed away, full of disgust. Among them, a soldier didn't know what happened. His eyes jumped forward, his legs softened, and his body fell down. The order on the city wall suddenly became chaotic. That's right, this moat contains an untold amount of rubbish from the city of Rennes. No matter what it is dumped in, it's disgusting. This is because the city government knew that the British army was coming, so it gave some guidance in advance. Otherwise, the entire moat would have been blocked up to half the height of the city wall, and the British army could directly step on the garbage to enter the city. Therefore, there are two colors on the city wall of Rennes at this time. One is off-white and the other is dirty black. After the first round of mistakes, there were no problems in the next few rounds. 1/3 of the stone bullets fell into the city, 1/3 hit the city wall, and another third disappeared. In this way, there were more than 10 rounds of going back and forth. After a whole morning, the entire city of Rennes was smashed unevenly, and the stone bullets thrown in the city also caused serious damage. Rennes City also used several cannons on the city wall and began to counterattack fiercely. However, a few cannons could not cause damage to the British army, let alone wipe out the artillery positions. In fact, after the Marquis of Edinburgh saw that the city of Rennes was only defending but not attacking, he realized that it was only a matter of time before the city of Rennes was captured. If there is no soldier camp outside the city to cooperate with the city, then the city can only be beaten passively and cannot fight back. Sure enough, after a break at noon, after several rounds of shelling continued in the afternoon, the entire surface of Rennes City was already pockmarked, full of pits and crumbling. Looking at this scene, the Marquis of Edinburgh felt a bit of relief, and the embarrassment of the morning had been swept away at this moment. The white flag was suddenly raised in Rennes City, and then the city gate fell, and a cavalryman with a white flag on his body rode a horse and slowly came to the British camp. After some tests, the envoy of Rennes met the famous conqueror of Edinburgh. The Marquis of Edinburgh respected Lord Marquis. On behalf of all the citizens of Rennes City, I would like to extend my sincere greetings to you. The envoy came to the front of the Marquis of Edinburgh generously, faced various British commanders, and spoke without changing his face. I thank you for your greeting, but, Mr. Messenger, I didn't know that you came out of Rennes. Is there anything I can teach you? The Marquis of Edinburgh accepted the blessing politely, but then asked directly with his eyes wide open. Due to the escape of the royal family and the heroic command of your lord, I am here to negotiate with you on behalf of the city of Rennes. The envoy emphasized the royal family, and said that it was not because their combat effectiveness was too rubbish, but because there was something wrong with the higher-ups regarding this. The Marquis of Edinburgh was non-committal, with a disapproving expression on his face, and so did the others. They all believed that even if the Roon family was still there, with their strength, they could still capture the city of Rennes. What are your conditions, Mr. Messenger? With a smile on his face, the Marquis asked frivolously. Or, what conditions do you need to surrender? Lord Marquis's frivolous question made the group of judges laugh, and the tent was filled with joy. On behalf of the city of Rennes, I'm going to negotiate with your excellency. The envoy looked at this scene, his face flushed slightly, and he still said in an unassuming manner after the Marquis of Edinburgh made a gesture of invitation. He took a breath and continued, first, after your army enters the city of Rennes, you are not allowed to carry out any acts of robbery. Yes, but you need to provide 10,000 ducats as compensation. The Marquis of Edinburgh added randomly, ducats are gold coins minted in Venice, Italy, and circulate throughout Europe. The livre currently in circulation in France is just a silver coin. Taking a deep breath, the messenger nodded heavily and replied, yes. Article 2, don't kill the citizens of Rennes at will. Can. Do not persecute or kidnap any member of the city government. Can. Do not interfere with judicial and administrative operations. Can't. Why? Asked the messenger. Not just Rennes, but even Brittany. All rights belong to His Majesty the King, including your city government. The Marquis of Edinburgh stood up, looked at the messenger with a serious face, and said loudly, immediately winning everyone's applause, okay, Mr. Messenger. The Marquis of Edinburgh looked directly at the calm messenger with a grim expression, and said firmly, I agree to the previous few items, but please remember, we are the winners now, and you are the losers. There is no need to talk about the latter conditions. These 3 conditions are the conditions I give you to surrender. Please cherish it. Recommend a book by Nanming. The writing is good. Reborn as the Emperor of Nanming. I recommend everyone to read it. Chapter 452. Imminent. The next day, the city government of Rennes fully accepted the conditions, opened the city gates, and began to welcome the British army into the city. On this day, the sun was shining brightly and there were no clouds in the sky. Only the light wind still lured the tall trees standing straight upright and lifted the long blue hair of the young girls. The city gate was lowered, and the city government on both sides let the city guards stand on both sides as guards, or guards. The high-level British army headed by the Marquis of Edinburgh wore military uniforms, raised their chins, rode a big horse, and marched into the city of Rennes with their heads held high and their chests high. With a gentle movement of the horseshoes following them was the Royal Army of the United Kingdom of Britain in red uniforms. They are clean and tidy, imposing, with vigorous steps, eyes looking forward, and rhythmic strides, giving people a high-spirited spirit. And they seem to be the teachers of the king. In everyone's impression, Britain has always been famous for its lobster soldiers, but, in fact, it was just the borrowed style of the 17th and 18th centuries. The British Army at this time was not much different from other countries since it is a unified army. They also wore unified military uniforms. The upper body is a red and white striped shirt, the lower body is black trousers, and a flat hat is worn on the head. What is more conspicuous is that they all have a piece of armor on their chest to protect their hearts, which shows that although they have moved away from the medieval armor model, they are still deeply affected with guns in their hands. The British soldiers began to enter the city gate with neat and rhythmic steps. After the temporary darkness of the city gate, the scene presented to the British soldiers was exactly this. The organized citizens held flowers in their hands, smiled on their faces, waved their arms, and yelled about the English people. There are a large number of people standing on both sides of the street, both men and women, lively, as if they are participating in some lively religious activities. This welcome scene greatly encouraged the British troops who were walking in neat steps. Hey man, look, it's nice of these people to welcome us so warmly. A tall and thin soldier moved his lips in understanding, twisted his neck, and said to the soldier standing next to him, compared with other ordinary soldiers, he is like walking on stilts, making people look up. Yes, it's really good. Look at those little girls, they are really fascinating. The soldier of average height raised his head slightly, looked at the tall man, said a few words in response, and then said in surprise, oh my God. Your height is mesmerizing. Feeling that he discriminated against others, he finally chose a word to describe it at random. Oh, thank you so much for your compliment. The big man curled his lips helplessly and turned his head back. Another person who has advice about his height. But in the welcome team, the organized citizens were very enthusiastic, as if they were not welcoming the invaders, but an army of their own country. Of course, the citizens welcomed that although it was organized by the city government, After learning that the British army no longer looted the city, their dislike for the British army disappeared. In addition, their curiosity about the British army made them come out of their homes and take a look at the Englishmen who conquered Brittany in less than a month. Just when Brittany sounded the clarion call of complete liberation, the Normandy area was in constant war. In other words, since he sent an envoy to ask for help, but only brought back a few hundred cavalry, although Earl Gabriel of Rouen City was a little disappointed, he didn't show it, and instead made a big deal of it for a while. The news that the British army had come to support resounded throughout the city of Rouen, and the shaking morale of the army suddenly stabilized. Everyone believed that this was just the vanguard of the British army. It would not be long before a large number of British troops would arrive to rescue the city of Rouen. The Duke of Guise, who was attacking, naturally felt the morale of the defenders increased, and for a while, the battle became more and more anxious. In the blink of an eye, more than 3 weeks had passed since the city of Rouen was besieged, and the patience of the Duke of Guise had run out. Come here. Yes, my lord. The Duke of Guise looked ahead and said fiercely, order the 3,000 people prepared in the rear to join today's siege team. I will attack Rouen with all my strength within 3 days. Yes. The orderly agreed bluntly, and then left quickly. Your Excellency, those 3,000 people are guarding against the English, and they cannot be easily evacuated. On the side, Antoine de Naval, King of Navarre and Duke of Vendôme looked at the Duke of Guise's order in surprise, and asked immediately, I don't have the patience to wear it out. England is currently staying in Le Havre, and I will definitely not be able to come to Rouen for a while. The Duke of Guise endured the anger in his heart and explained, in 3 days, concentrate on capturing this city, if not, I will retreat. Hearing this, Antoine was silent. The city had consumed a large number of soldiers, and indeed it could not continue later. The Rouen defenders discovered that the attacking Catholic army was more powerful than before. They could barely resist the attack, but now they can't resist it, and the English cavalry, who had been fighting guerrilla outside Rouen, harassed the French camp wantonly. When they saw this, however, the French army took a defensive position and concentrated their efforts on attacking the city of Rouen. Lord Earl, I can't hold it anymore. I really can't hold it anymore. An orderly came to the Earl's mansion bumpily, with scars on his body and tattered clothes, and said in a crying voice, the Catholics have completely attacked the city wall. We can only defend the stairs, fighting and retreating. It won't take long for the city wall to completely fall. What? The king's layer's face changed greatly when he heard this, and his body trembled non-stop. If Rouen city was captured, wouldn't he and his whole family die? Hurry up and ask all the guards on the mansion to go up to support, and then ask all the nobles in the city to launch guards and climb up the city wall together. After panicking for a while, the Earl recovered immediately, and he said loudly to his butler, let all the men in the city go up, take up weapons and go to the city wall to support, and we must keep the Catholics out of Rouen. Seeing the Earl's appearance like this, the butler immediately agreed, and stepped forward to give instructions. And just after the Duke of Guise ordered the 3,000 people defending his rear to evacuate, only a patrol team of dozens of people was left as an early warning force. The Alexander Knight, leading more than 6,000 British troops, quietly came to the foot of the hill 10 miles away from the French camp. More than 6,000 British soldiers sat neatly on the ground, waiting for orders. Chapter 453, Confronting the French Army. More than 6,000 people sat quietly on the wasteland, and the sun kept emitting heat, as if making things difficult for these soldiers sitting on the ground, making their foreheads sweat profusely as the commander-in-chief, the commander of everyone present, Knight Alexander, also took off his armor and hid under the shadow of the tree to enjoy the shade. On the other hand, the adjutant at the side wittily held a fan to fan the hard-working commander-in-chief to reduce the heat. Dong dong dong. There was a sound of horseshoes, which startled a large number of soldiers sitting on the ground. They all raised their heads and looked at the orderly on horseback. Let's talk. How's the situation? Cavalier Alexander's handsome face showed a hint of anxiety. My lord, the French have already boarded the city wall of Rouen. I don't think it will be long before the city of Rouen will be captured. The cavalry pony quickly, and after a short trot, walked up to Knight Alexander, and said respectfully. Hearing this, Knight Alexander immediately got up and took out the binoculars to look at it. Although he couldn't see anything, it gave him strong confidence. Since the city of Rouen called for help, Knight Alexander hastily recruited soldiers for joint training. After being free range for so long, I finally trained them well. Immediately afterwards, he asked other cities occupied by Protestants to deliver food, grass and gunpowder, and he was fully prepared to attack El for long distances. In order to confuse the Duke of Guise, he sent people to spread rumors everywhere, saying that Britain did not want to cause trouble and did not want to go to war with the French. In order to alleviate the Duke of Guise's doubts, however, who knew that when they arrived near the city of Rouen yesterday, they discovered that the Catholic allies were patrolling, and there was even a camp stationed in front of the main camp, which looked like an acropolis. In this way, Knight Alexander realized that the Duke of Guise had not taken it lightly, but was very wary of them. But today, the Duke of Guise suddenly withdrew thousands of people and joined the siege team, which made Mr. Knight heave a sigh of relief. Then there was the scene of thousands of people sitting on the grass, just to wait for Tanky to figure out the actual situation before he lost his confidence. In the past few weeks, a lot of the strength of the Catholic League has been consumed, and the strength of the Protestants in the city is believed to be exhausted at this moment. It is time for them to decide the outcome. Proceed with the order. Everyone prepares, and the whole army goes straight to the city of Rouen. Turning his head, Knight Alexander said to his adjutant, "A young nobleman. He is the nephew of the Marquis of Edinburgh, and heir to the future Marquis of Edinburgh, so Knight Alexander valued him very much and wanted to train him." "Yes, Your Excellency." The young adjutant agreed quickly with a straight face, and then went to deliver the order as instructed, simply and neatly. He was a good seed. Soon, the messenger passed the order to each company commander, and then the whole army began to prepare, standing up with the company as a unit, and gradually gathered around the commander according to the sound of the band. After more than 10 minutes, the infantry began to march in a hurry. It took 5 hours to cover the 10 miles. By the time they arrived outside Rouen, it was already 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. After resting for half an hour, looking at the French soldiers who were constantly climbing up the city wall in front of them, most of the teams were lined up to get on the city wall. After a rough estimate, there are still about 5,000 soldiers under the city wall, but they are exhausted and ready to fight. It can be seen from this that the French army has taken the initiative, while the defenders of Rouen are like a flatboat in a storm, and the wind and rain are misty, and they are gradually falling. At the moment when he was observing, there were more than 300 cavalry sent to support the 500 cavalry who had been sent to support Knight Alexander in tattered clothes. "My lord, the cavalry company is returning. Please order." The cavalry company commander came to Knight Alexander's side in disgrace, and said loudly, "Get ready. We will attack the French army together later." The knight glanced at the cavalry company commander. Although he was a little displeased with his disheveled appearance, he didn't blame him for the fact that he had been holding part of the French army in Rouen. Soon, more than 6,000 English soldiers lined up, stepping on drums, and walked towards the Catholic allied forces in front of them step by step. And the Duke of Guise was at the arrival of the British army. He found a trace, and he was extremely annoyed to see this important moment being interrupted. Duke Vendôme immediately ordered the soldiers on the wall to come down and fight the English together. The Duke of Guise gritted his teeth and gave instructions to the Duke of Vendôme beside him, and then began to sit in command to stabilize the morale of the army. The Duke of Guise is worthy of being an old hand. By the time the Knights of Alexander assembled the cavalry to prepare for the attack, he had already stabilized the morale of the army and put on a defensive posture. Seeing this moment, the Alexander Knight rode his horse and was located in the rear, and began to direct the soldiers to attack. Because the British army adopted the Spanish phalanx for training, all the soldiers walked in a rigid manner, stepping on the beat, and marching forward bravely. The phalanx was divided into 3, with 8 rows of pikemen in front of each phalanx and 2 rows of musketeers in the back. The front and back were about 150 meters deep and 100 meters wide. They began to march forward bravely. Dang dang dang, dang dang dang. Seeing the pace and formation of the Englishmen in front of them, one after another, the Duke of Guise was shocked. When did the English start to learn from the Spaniards? The English army hadn't shown up on the European continent for a long time, but who knew that the army had learned the Spanish method to organize the army, which surprised him, having often fought against the Spaniards. The Duke of Guise knew that this kind of phalanx is not suitable for fighting in the mountains, but it is the most powerful in the plains, and he encountered it today. Let the cavalry attack from both sides, and the infantry charge directly. In desperation, the Duke of Guise arranged a way of not going up or down. Soon, the French cavalry began to charge towards both sides of the British army, with an indomitable momentum, but the phalanx on both sides quickly began to deform, and they were ready for the cavalry. The cavalry bravely charged towards the pikemen and defeated the first 2 rows of pikemen in an instant, but the following pikemen were not afraid at all, surrounded them without fear, and began to thrust regularly. No matter how thick the armor was, it couldn't withstand the stabbing of the spears. The cavalry surrounded by the spearmen seemed to have entered a quagmire, and it was difficult to pull out. They could only be wiped out one by one at this time. The infantry in front also began to charge forward. Although they also smashed the first few rows of pikemen, the subsequent pikes and arquebuses wiped them out without delay. Chapter 454, Reaching the Established Goal. The biggest weakness of the Spanish formation in this era is the soldiers. The frontal enemy is not terrible, but what is terrible is that the enemy attacks from the side. If the soldiers have not undergone strict training, they will not be able to turn smoothly and perform cue changes. As a result, the enemy attacking from the side will kill the musketeers one by one with their knives on the ground, and the pikemen who do not respond in time can only be defeated. And for the British Army, there is no difficulty in changing the cue for side attack. Since the establishment of the Royal Army, it has been trained in the Spanish phalanx method, among which it has paid special attention to discipline and military regulations. In later generations, the so-called army is distinguished by strict military regulations. The U family army and the Key family army are all made strong by strict military regulations. Therefore, after obtaining a pair of training rules compiled by His Majesty the King based on university military training and military methods heard, the strength of the entire kingdom army was greatly improved. Therefore, when the cavalry attacked on both sides, under the unbelievable eyes of the cavalry, they began to change ranks, and launched a fierce counterattack against the cavalry head-on. Therefore, from a distance, the cavalry on both sides and the infantry in front have been deeply trapped in the British phalanx, unable to extricate themselves. Quick, fire the artillery and shoot those English savages hard. Seeing such a situation, the Duke of Guise couldn't have imagined that his army had been dragged down, and what was waiting for them was to be eaten up a little bit. So, when he saw this, he shouted loudly, wanting the artillery to save his army. "Yes, Your Excellency." The artillery commander on the side immediately agreed, but he said a little embarrassedly, "However, there is not much gunpowder left, so we can support 2 rounds at most." Hearing this, the Duke of Guise glared at him fiercely, then turned his head to look at the soldiers on the battlefield, and ordered loudly, "You cover them with artillery fire, let the soldiers retreat, including those on the city wall. Orderly, this is your duty." "Yes, my lord." Immediately, 2 crisp voices sounded, boom, boom. Afterwards, artillery fire rang out from the French army's position, and then a dozen boulders rushed towards the British army. Boom, the boulder fell into the phalanx of the British army without any rules, and stunned the soldiers who were entangled with the French army. "Oh my God! Help!" This was the first time the soldiers encountered such a situation, and they couldn't help showing a panicked look, and the formation tended to collapse for a while. "Stand firm. What are you afraid of? Continue to kill the enemy." "Stop for me. I didn't run away. Why are you running?" The soldiers were in chaos, but the officers played a very good role at this time. They used various tricks to quickly stabilize the morale of the army, and the phalanx returned to its original state in a short time. Unfortunately, taking advantage of their chaotic moment, the French army has already played the music of retreat. Most of the French army has got rid of the entanglement of the British army and began to retreat. Damn it. An officer in his 20s with long gray-brown hair cursed as he watched the scene where the French had evacuated in front of him. He didn't know about the others, but he was very unwilling that these Frenchmen slipped away from him, which symbolized merit and future. As a child who came out of the orphan camp, he left the orphan camp at the age of 16 and chose the army without hesitation. Therefore, in just 10 years, he has changed from a small soldier to a second lieutenant company commander and a mid-level official in charge of more than 250 people. Thanks to the officer's generous salary and the royal family's army subsidy, his monthly income has reached £20, and he also found a merchant's daughter and successfully settled in London. However, although there is no shortage of money, he still wants to climb up and gain merits, so as to become a knight and elevate his family in one fell swoop. And the retreat of the French army in front of him made him full of unwillingness. Human head. These are military medals, not only him, but also other military officers. At their level, money is no longer a pursuit, and titles are their goal. And as the supreme commander, the Alexander Knight is the same. Although he has been in charge of the army, he has not gained merits from the battlefield. Even if His Majesty the King trusts him, his title is still a knight, not a knight who ranks high. Therefore, the withdrawal of the French army was the last thing he could bear. "Catch me, keep your formation, and chase with the whole army." Riding on a horse, watching the back of the French army gradually leaving, Knight Alexander shouted loudly. Immediately, the messenger passed on the order, and the whole army began to slowly pursue it. Some of the withdrawal of the French army maintained a clear team order, but most of them turned into rout, throwing their guns and disarming their armor, and they were in a panic. Weapons were scattered all over the place: swords, shields, spears, flags, and so on. After all, Most of them are just farmers who come here with passion, so how much discipline can they have? Although the cavalry only withdrew about half of them, leaving only 1,000 men, they returned in an orderly manner and were not attacked again at this time. Looking at the slowly approaching British army, and looking at the city of Rouen behind him, the Duke of Guise realized that if he didn't run away, he would be in danger after the cavalry returned to the team, plus the soldiers who came down from the city wall and the soldiers who evacuated ahead. There were more than 4,000 people in total. Go. Get out of here. Quickly put on a layer of armor with the help of his attendants, the Duke of Guise took a deep look at the defenders of Rouen, who were pressing the British army tightly and gradually retracting the city wall, and said, "Neatly said, England, I will remember you." The Duke of Guise roared madly in his heart. He could not forget the humiliation that the English gave him immediately. Everyone no longer had any objections, and surrounded the Duke of Guise, and began to evacuate at a high speed. However, how can ordinary people catch up with the speed of cavalry? Although most of the cavalry escorted the Duke of Guise to quickly withdraw from the battlefield, most of the infantry could not catch up. The only thing waiting for them is to be encircled and suppressed, and surrender has become their only choice. "My lord, do you want me to catch up and take down those Frenchmen?" Seeing that the Duke of Guise and others were about to flee, the cavalry on the side were eager to try and called for a fight. After thinking for a while, Knight Alexander said, "Yes, but you have to remember to consume them little by little, and don't fight directly, and, after pursuing for 20 miles, come back immediately." "Yes, my lord." Although several cavalry generals did not understand what Alexander meant, they still agreed loudly after they left. Looking at the messy battlefield, Knight Alexander sighed. London's goal has been achieved. Chapter 455 Victory. Knight Alexander led the army to defeat the Duke of Guise, and then, together with Count Gabriel and Rouen, they would wipe out the Catholic allies on the city wall. After more than half a day, the defeated French army and the captured materials were finally sorted out, and the results satisfied Knight Alexander. The knight sat comfortably on the chair, closed his eyes, and listened to the adjutant's reading. "Currently, our army has 1,800 casualties among them. More than 600 people died, more than 500 people were seriously injured, and more than 600 people were slightly injured. It is estimated that after 1 week, 400 people will be able to continue fighting, more than 100 people will be disabled and unable to fight, and more than 1,200 people will die." Speaking of this, the death rate of the wounded soldiers still reached about 50%, and the adjutant still felt a little uncomfortable on French soil. The British army has a little more strength for each extra man, and a lesser force for each less man in this era. The number of people who die immediately on the battlefield will never account for the largest number of downsizing. Serious injuries are equal to the death penalty, and minor injuries are left to fate. This is the status quo even if the army adopted the white bandage and alcohol disinfection method compiled by His Majesty the King. It still failed to prevent the huge death rate. Hearing this, even though Knight Alexander was ready, he still frowned and waited for work. It was still 1/6 of the battle attrition. The French should not be underestimated. After that, there is good news. In this battle, we seized 200 muskets, more than 100 barrels of wine, more than 5,000 stones of grain, 50.8 caddies per stone, more than 1,000 high-quality horses, more than 3,000 poor horses, and more than 5,000 spears. Rods, more than 2,000 pairs of iron swords and shields of various types. The most important thing is that we captured 6 cannons, which is the biggest harvest. Hearing so many weapons and equipment, the knight couldn't help but nodded, expressing his satisfaction. "What about the prisoners? How many French prisoners do we have?" Upon hearing the inquiry, the adjutant hurriedly flipped through the documents, glanced at them, and continued, "At present, more than 4,300 soldiers of the French Catholic Allied forces have been captured, more than 500 people have been captured in Rouen, and more than 2,000 people have fled. If the consumption of the previous few weeks is included, the Duke of Guise took away there are more than 3,000 people, including more than 1,000 cavalry, Catholics, so many Catholics are captured." Alice. Knight Alexander felt a headache when he heard that there were nearly 5,000 prisoners. Most of the Normandy area believes in Protestantism, and a small part believes in Catholicism. At present, Protestantism is still an ally of the United Kingdom. Letting them go is equivalent to strengthening the power of Catholicism. If you don't let go, so many people will definitely drag down the strength of the British army and violate the progress. It seems that we still need to increase the number of troops in the country, the knight exclaimed. Anders, exist, write to London, to His Majesty the King, requesting reinforcements. and explaining our difficulties. Yes, my lord. The young adjutant quickly agreed. Dong dong dong. There was a knock on the door outside. What's the matter? The knight couldn't help asking. My lord, the Earl of Rouen City invites you to discuss important matters. Hearing the attendant's voice, Knight Alexander blinked his eyes. Although he didn't know what Earl Gabriel was looking for him for, but he had something important to look for him, so he happened to be on the way, so he agreed. The knight brought his servants to the Earl's mansion in the carriage provided by Earl Gabriel. Entering the relatively private study room, Knight Alexander squinted his eyes, and sat down under the kind greeting of the Earl. Thank you so much, Mr. Knight. The Earl showed his enthusiasm as always, and said to Knight Alexander with a smile, without you, the city of Rouen and I would have been persecuted by those Catholics. Anyway, thank you very much. Judging from the situation at the time, the troops under the Duke of Guise suffered such heavy casualties. After the capture of Rouen, the massacre of the city must be inevitable, so Earl Gabriel expressed his gratitude. You're welcome, Lord Earl. The knight's mature and handsome face showed a trace of humility. These are what we should do. After all, we are still allies. Speaking of allies, the knight couldn't help but emphasize his tone. The Earl's smile did not stagnate at all because of this, but it became even brighter. Yes, we are allies, allies. The Earl quickly responded, but, as an ally, will you still abide by the agreement? As a soldier of the United Kingdom, it is my obligation to execute military orders, and compliance with the agreement naturally includes it, the knight said righteously, and the light of justice scattered all over his handsome face, which looked very convincing. Very good, Mr. Knight. The Earl said happily. At present, General Coligny and Prince Condé are attacking Paris. According to the alliance, you need to send people to help. However, Lord Earl, we just fought a battle and drove away the Duke of Guise. I'm afraid we won't be able to support Prince Condé anymore. Knight Alexander looked at the expectant count and said helplessly, after we repair, we will definitely fulfill our promise. The knight said righteously, however, before that, as part of the covenant, the city of Rouen needs to be handed over to us. As he said that, the knight looked at the Earl, who was full of dissatisfaction, and said seriously, this, I'm afraid it will take a while. After all, Rouen City has just recovered, and it needs time to buffer it. The Count looked at the knight with half a smile in his eyes, stuttered a little, and then spoke nonsense very smoothly. Then, let's talk about it after a while. The knight got up quickly, turned around and said something meaningful, and then left without the city of Rouen. The Knights of Alexander immediately sent troops to occupy the city of Seymour, the central city of Lower Normandy, and then occupied the Manger Township area, the most agriculturally developed area in Normandy, to ensure the food supply of the British army. And with the addition of the Fort Street, Malo, and the port of Le Havre, the essence of Normandy is already in the hands of the British army. After the letter from Fige arrived in London, His Majesty Edward and the coalition government immediately approved the proposal to increase troops. Another 3,000 soldiers were sent as support. In other words, the total strength of the British army in Normandy reached more than 8,000 people, becoming an important force that affected the balance of the French Civil War. The expansion of the British army made most cities in the Normandy area choose to surrender and began to supply military expenses and food, which made the Alexander Knights more confident in defending the Normandy area. What surprised him even more was that these soldiers also brought 20 iron cannons, and also brought a ship of strange things called cement, and along with them, a group of craftsmen. According to His Majesty the King, these are his sharp weapons for defending the city. Chapter 456, the 467th Negotiation. The Duke of Guise ran forward with a remnant of the army, and came to Elbeuf, a small town tens of kilometers away from Rouen. Out of nostrils, His Excellency the Duke stopped, and finally many cavalry who followed him breathed a sigh of relief and stopped to rest for a while. Have the English come after them? The Duke of Guise rubbed his waist, gasping for breath, and asked the cavalry commander around him. No, the English are not chasing them anymore. The cavalry commander glanced at the surrounding cavalry and replied after receiving a positive answer, that's good, Erdorf is ahead. Let everyone enter and take a rest. Glancing at the small town ahead, the Duke of Guise breathed a sigh of relief and ordered afterwards. The cavalry followed the Duke of Guise and entered Eldorf, rested for a long time, and then continued to Paris until Vernon, which was close to the Isle de France region, was relieved. Already more than 200 miles in the end, the Duke of Guise counted, and the cavalry who ran out with him were only more than 1,100, and the infantry had just reached 1,000. In other words, out of the more than 10,000 people he brought over, there are only 2,000 people left, which is a heavy loss. What made the Duke even more distressing was that more than half of the thousands of elite veterans he had brought with him had already been lost. The price was too cruel. Damn Rouen, damn English. The Duke of Guise could not stop cursing in his heart. This is the biggest loss he has suffered since he led the battle. Even in the face of the Spaniards, he has never suffered such a serious injury. This is a huge blow to his prestige. At the same time, the news that England captured Normandy and Brittany at the same time began to prevail throughout France, and the entire French nobles, priests, and royal family panicked. The nobles are unwilling to have a strong monarch to control France again, and it is the same barbaric Englishmen who once slaughtered them. The priests, whether they were Catholics or Huguenots, they all knew what England did, and even more so Henry VIII's approach. Even in terms of protecting their faith and property, they were unwilling to be crowned by the English, crowned by the French crown, of course. What is most frightening is the French royal family in a small country town at this time. Although Charles IX, King of France, was still young, he was not very clear about the meaning behind the failure of the Duke of Guise and the loss of Brittany, but he understood that the crown on his head was in danger at this time as the regent. Queen Catherine naturally understood what this meant with her political sense. Therefore, at this moment, she understands that the civil war can no longer continue. At this time, France is facing the same situation as the 100 Years' War. Therefore, she couldn't wait to send an invitation to the Catholic League and the Huguenots for peace talks, asking the two factions to put the interests of France first and jointly drive the English out of France. Orleans City is the stronghold of the Huguenots. Since the Duke of Guise left with part of the army, Prince Condé and General Coligny, who besieged Paris, immediately withdrew their troops and resolved the siege of Orleans. Before that, they were extremely happy when they learned that the Englishmen and the Duke of Guise had started to hurt each other in the eyes of the Huguenots. The English, who belong to the Protestant Church, are obviously much more lovely than the Catholics. They don't mind losing the Normandy region, provided, of course, they gain power in France, and after gaining power, driving away the English is nothing more than an easy task. Yes, it is indeed easy, even if Edward doesn't admit it in his heart. He has to say that the French have forgotten the royal family that owns the crown but lives in England. More importantly, the failure of England and France in the 100 Years' War not only caused England to lose its most important name, but also created antagonism. In other words, war is really the best national catalyst. The 100 Years' War reunified the French Valois dynasty and gave birth to the so-called French nation afterwards. The concept of the English and the French as two nationalities became deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, and before Prussia unified Germany, the two were feuds. The Huguenots didn't care about the loss of Brittany. It was just a remote area that had not been incorporated into France for a long time. More importantly, it was the territory of the Catholic League, but the Normandy area is different. It is close to Flanders, and the economy is developing well. More importantly, it is the basic base of the Huguenots and cannot be lost. Everyone, the English have occupied all of Normandy except Rouen. The Duke of Guise has returned in a big defeat. The Queen Regent invited us to negotiate peace with the Catholic League. What do you think? As the leader of the Huguenots and the commander-in-chief of the army, Prince Condé looked at the high-ranking Huguenots and asked the first question. I think we can temporarily abandon Normandy and take advantage of the Duke of Guise's heavy loss to defeat the Catholic League in one fell swoop, so that we can concentrate our efforts and drive away the English. As soon as the voice fell, one person stood up and spoke, bluntly intending to kill everything, advocating first the inside and then the outside. No, the British occupy Brittany and Normandy, so the Spaniards will definitely not sit idly by. France will be treated as a piece of fat, and our Italian region and southwest will be in danger. The current strategy is to get rid of the English. This proposition puts the outside first before the inside, focusing on national interests. Then, other people continued to refute and discuss these two viewpoints and guidelines, and there were endless debates in the city of Vernon. Charles de Guise, Archbishop of Reims, hurried back to see his brother. My dear brother, why are you here? Duke Guise was puzzled by his brother's arrival. Could it be that he came here to comfort himself when he saw that he had lost the battle? But this is not in line with his character. Francois, the news of your failure has now spread throughout France. Archbishop Charlie glanced at his brother, then said softly, seeing a tinge of anger rising from the Duke of Guise's face. He said again, Queen Catherine asked us to make peace with the Huguenots and drive out the English together. This time, I came here to ask for your opinion. You agreed? Charlie. Duke Guise asked with a straight face. I agree. France does not need Englishmen. Although its king married our niece, Queen Mary is their sister, and Edward married their niece Queen Mary, so in theory, Edward still has the right to inherit the Duke of Guise. Chapter 457 Skyrocketing Bonds. The news of the victory in Normandy and the defeat of the Guise Catholic League by the Royal Army reached London, and the first reaction was government bonds. Since in this day and age there is no stock exchange, no stocks, and government bonds are one of those things that can be traded and change everyone, it exists in the London exchanges, large and small. Due to the economic and trade prosperity of England and the entire United Kingdom, London has become the largest export and import port, with a wide variety of goods. In order for merchants to save time to complete trade more efficiently and obtain profits, exchanges were born. This is the result of the natural formation of society, not the guidance of some traverser. But the prosperity of the economy was facilitated by him alone, and there are also some reasons for it here. With the transaction information of various goods, it is the best place for merchants to trade goods. Every merchant can list the goods they need or sell here, and give an ideal price. If someone is interested, a deal will be concluded. South London Exchange urgent notice, United government bonds urgently needed, 1 shilling more per share, urgent need for coalition bonds at 1 shilling and 2pence a share, 1 shilling and 3pence. All over the exchange the buzz of demand for Union government bonds became the main theme of the exchange, not only in the south of the city, but also in the other 4 exchanges in London. The demand for bonds has increased dramatically. The reason for this is that the United Kingdom government issued a large amount of bonds in order to support the attack on France, and the amount reached £500,000. More importantly, in order to save interest, the coalition government is prepared to use the interests of its own 4 layers, according to the interest distribution practice stipulated by the king, 4 layers of the government, 3 layers of the military, and 3 layers of the royal family, as guarantees, and allow bond winners to bond convertible to French land, 5 floors below market price. In other words, if you buy a £10 bond, you can use this bond to buy land in the British occupied area of France, and the land price is 5 floors lower. As we all know, France has nothing else but a lot of land, and the land is fertile. Compared with England's humid weather, the annual harvest is much higher. With the increase of the population of the United Kingdom and inflation, the preservation of land value has been unanimously recognized by all. But in England and the United Kingdom, most of the land is owned by famous people. They naturally know that the land is rare, and the chance of selling it is equal to the continuous victories of the Royal Army, and most importantly, their defeat of the French Field Marshal Duke of Guise, has continuously increased the weight of the United Army in the hearts of the people of the entire United Kingdom. More importantly, after 4 months of slow sales of the £500,000 bond issued by the coalition government, there are still more than 100,000 bonds left. At the moment when Wang Jun won, the 100,000 were sold out immediately. Not only the nobles and businessmen, but even the beggars on the side of the road and the women who lost their way in brothels all knew that buying government bonds was cheaper than paying money. High interest rate loans also make money. The tide has swept through the United Kingdom, and the calls to buy bonds in the exchange are louder than the cries of lost women at night. Hampton Court, on the green, the sun in the sky rarely showed face, lazily spreading its brilliance and heat. A large cloud that looked like a lion moved slowly in the air, as if looking for prey. As the King of the United Kingdom, Edward was lying leisurely on a special lounge chair, with an imperial parasol above his head, trying to protect his majesty from the scorching sun. He looked at a book in his hand, a collection of poems about the British goddess, or a collection of stories, all of which described stories about the British goddess in the West. Faith and respect are 2 different things. People can respect other gods, but faith and prayer belong to God only. This collection of poems praising the British goddess is extremely popular throughout London. It is said that the sales volume has reached 5,000 copies a week. That is to say, 1 out of every 400 people in London is holding this collection of poems. This is extremely rare in the 16th century, when the literacy rate was low. Seeing this achievement, His Majesty Edward had to lament that in this era, religious suppression is still too severe, and people lack entertainment. Your Majesty, the government bonds in London are now worth £1 and 2 shillings a share. A secretary hurried over and whispered in Edward's ear. I see. Edward agreed without raising his head. Still, according to my instructions, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, sell bonds of £100,000. No need to say anything. Of course, Edward knew that these secretaries were distressed by so much profit. They thought that the current price was not the final price of the bond. It would be a pity to sell it today, but the young king didn't think so. The £200,000 of bonds he bought before were sold after a while, although he could get a bigger profit. However, selling it now and earning more than £16,000 is enough. Besides, the world changes too fast. Who knows that winning at this time will not fail after a while? At this time, the sale of £100,000 is to reduce risks, and the second is to allow Londoners to obtain more benefits, so as to condense more communities of interests, and let the war kidnap the entire London and the United Kingdom. Yes, I will obey your orders, the secretary said in a low voice, with a helpless look at His Majesty the King, who continued to read. Not long after the secretary left, Edward heard a very childish voice again. Father, I want to ride a horse. I want to ride a horse. His Majesty. Edward looked up helplessly, and it turned out to be his eldest son, Henry Tudor, the first son born to little maid Lucy. For this eldest son, Edward still pays more attention to it. If there is no accident, he will replace the royal family in the future and guard the territory of the French kingdom, such as the Normandy area. What's the matter, my Henry? Edward's tone was very gentle, and he had always had a good temper with his 7-year-old son because he is relatively busy. The teachers who educate the children are taught by the teachers invited by the royal family and their mothers. That is to say, Lucy and others play the white face, and Edward plays the red face. Father, I want to ride a horse too, a big horse. Little Henry has long brown hair that is slightly rolled up, brown eyes, and his lips are curled up at this time, with his right index finger pointing to the side, riding a horse, and constantly patrolling the surrounding guards. Oh? Really? Little Henry wants to ride a horse? Edward rolled his eyes and asked softly. Yes, Father, I want to ride a big horse. Ride a big horse. Little Henry pouted his lips and nodded with certainty. Fearing that Edward would not allow it, he repeatedly said about big horses, which was indescribably cute. Then can you insist on bathing it every day, cleaning it, combing its hair, and taking it out for a walk often? Chapter 458 Education of Children. Of course I can. Little Henry tilted his head. After thinking for a moment, he hesitated for a moment, and then nodded quickly, with a tender yet firm voice. Then, he stared at his father, the King of the United Kingdom, with beautiful brown eyes. Regarding this, Edward smiled, put down the collection of poems in his hand, and looked seriously at his eldest son, who was also an illegitimate son. Very good, my son, I am convinced by your determination. He put his hands on the immature shoulders, feeling the immature determination of the owner of the shoulders. If you can take care of a foal for 3 months, then you will not only be a knight, but you will also have your own fief. He heard his father's pure and honest voice, and the corners of Henry's mouth began to curl up unconsciously, like a silly roe deer. At this moment, he was extremely happy. His favorite is knights, especially knights who like to ride big horses and wear armor. Although he doesn't know what the fief is, he understands that he is about to become a real knight. Looking at his father's dark blue eyes, little Henry couldn't restrain the excitement in his heart. He nodded fiercely and clenched his fists. Don't worry, Father, I will definitely become a knight. I will. Seeing the swearing look of the villain in front of him, Edward smiled, touched his head, and felt the intimacy of the blood, which made him feel happy. Little Henry jumped away from His Majesty's side, his little face flushed with excitement, like an apple mother, and, I'm going to be a knight. I'm a knight. Little Henry ran happily, left his father's side, and came to the grass where his mother and aunt gathered in 3 steps. At this time, on the grass, several lovers of His Majesty Edward were chatting together, talking and laughing. Perhaps it was the benefits of 3 wives and 4 concubines that Edward had instilled since he was a child, or maybe it was the result of the consolation and persuasion of Queen Mary, who was more lenient with the lovers of Her Majesty the King. Moreover, after the birth of the legitimate son Charles Tudor and his identity as the heir to the United Kingdom was confirmed, Queen Mary's attitude softened even more. For a few years, the two often met each other, chatting and so on, but Queen Mary generally lived in Whitehall Palace in London, which she was familiar with, while they lived in Hampton Palace. But several little lovers started reporting to the group. Lucy, look, isn't that little Henry? Look at him happy. What happened? Emma and Lucy Luna have the same fate, so they naturally have the best relationship. Seeing little Henry running wildly, she couldn't help teasing softly, with a voice like a silver bell. Where? Let me take a look. This little guy runs around every day. He is very naughty. I don't know who he looks like. When Lucy heard the words, she got up immediately, and saw her eldest son running over quickly, muttering something while running. Seeing this, she became furious, frowned her beautiful eyebrows, and muttered on the side. Her elder sister, Luna, who has always been quiet, was teasing her youngest son, John. Hearing this, she smiled softly. My dear Lucy, little Henry has learned his appearance from you. He is in such a hurry that he is out of shape all day long. Hearing her sister burying herself, Lucy immediately looked swollen, her eyes widened, and she looked at her sister, Luna, why are you talking about me again? This time the discussion is about little Henry. Immediately, her clever eyes turned to Alice, who was holding a book and reading it with relish, and said enviously, "Look at Alice, how ladylike she is. This is the demeanor a noble should really have." And Alice, whose eyes were focused on the book but her ears were pricked up, immediately raised her head when she heard the words, and smiled sweetly. "Thank you for the compliment, Aunt Lucy. Don't praise her, she will raise her tail after a while and get carried away." Luna smiled, glanced at Alice, who reacted quickly, and said involuntarily at this time. Little Henry finally ran to his mother, raised his chin happily and proudly, and said arrogantly, "Mom, I'm a knight now." Knight. Facing her son, Lucy immediately put on a stern look. Little Henry, who was a little bit arrogant, trembled and said, "A knight?" timidly. "Oh, who said that? Your father?" Lucy asked with narrowed eyes. "Yes, my lord father told me that as long as I raise a foal for 3 months, I can become a knight and have my own fief." Hearing this, Lucy understood that the young king had made arrangements for little Henry's future, and her heart relaxed quietly. With a rare smile on her face, "Henry, you have to remember, since you promised your father, you must do it." Little Henry stared dumbfounded at his mother's gentle appearance, nodded dumbly, and then watched his mother twist her buttocks and head towards his father on the one side. Emma and Luna glanced at little Henry in surprise, then turned to look at Adam, Emma's son, 7 years old, who was building his own castle with mud on the other side. He was bringing several of the younger siblings happily built a castle together. They were all dirty, but their faces were full of happiness. The two of them were used to such scenes before. After all, as illegitimate children, if their talents are too prominent, it may not be good for them in the future. But at this time, Edward personally promised to give little Henry a knight and a fief, which made them feel relieved. Immediately he quickly returned the few little guys beside him to the maid beside him, and hurriedly headed towards His Majesty's fort. At this time, His Majesty the King, who was reading a book, was disturbed again. "Edward, is everything you told little Henry true?" Lucy asked cautiously, looking into His Majesty's dark blue eyes, with a doubtful tone. "Of course, it's true." Edward raised his head, looked at his little maid seriously, and said with certainty, "Since little Henry is interested in knights, let him become a general or a marshal. As the descendants of the king, you must always have something to do. Not all of them are rich and rich. So, what about George, Adam, and John? Can they also become knights?" At this time, Luna and Emma also came over, saluted politely, and then asked softly, seeing these lovers come over, "I am very concerned about the future of my son." Seeing this, Edward finally got up from the recliner, squinted his eyes and glanced at the sun in the sky, and then said, "I have already thought about the future of Henry, Adam and others, as well as their education. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 459, Noble Academy. The education of the members of the royal family has always been Edward's concern, and he is thinking about it in his heart. Royal education is the most important thing for a country with absolute monarchy. For example, in the Ming Dynasty in history, you can find that the powerful emperor is directly proportional to the level of education received. Emperor Zizan of the Ming Dynasty did not receive education since he was a child, so his level of governing the country was undeniably low, while Changzhen, who was educated by the prince, was not very good, but managed the country for 17 years anyway. It brought about the economic prosperity of the late Ming Dynasty and took control of the government. Therefore, the Qing Dynasty learned the lessons of the Ming Dynasty and paid special attention to the education of the princes. Although most of the emperors were mediocre, they were normal anyway, and they could govern normally, and it dragged on for 300 years. All in all, in the next few hundred years, the education of the royal family will be the basis for the existence and strength of the royal family. In this regard, Edward already has a claim in the future. The members of the royal family who are born, whether they are men or women, and the noble children of the United Kingdom, will all enter this school to study. I named it Windsor College, and it is set up near Windsor Castle. Luna and the others were surprised by the young king's confident self-confidence, and then a wave of joy surged in his heart. If Adam and the others enter the study together with the real Prince Charlie, it will represent the recognition of their identity, and they will act as members of the royal family. Then, my lord, do you have any specific information to disclose? Luna came to Edward's back very affectionately, gently pressed his shoulders, let him sit down, and then slowly placed the king on her plump and huge body on His Majesty's temple. The slightly calloused hand was carefully but vigorously turned, and Lucy and Emma also wisely put the young king's arms into their plumpness, especially, now that it is summer. They are wearing high-grade silk. Edward felt that he was surrounded by a cloud. He hadn't tasted this kind of taste for a long time, and he wanted to try it this time. Thinking about it, Edward directly hugged Lucy, who is the lightest on Your Majesty. Lucy burst out in surprise, glanced at Luna and Emma, who were equally astonished, and shyly buried her head on the king's chest. After rubbing his buttocks and feeling a different kind of touch, he strode forward. After walking a few steps, he seemed to think of something, turned around and said suddenly, "Luna, Emma, old couples, come together. It's time for the royal family to add some new members." Immediately, the expressions of surprise on the faces of the three of Lucy intensified, and Kiki took a sip. Edward couldn't care less, and carried Lucy directly into the cool and dry room dedicated to summer. At the door, two maids were about to close the evil door, but were stopped by His Majesty the King. Finally, he showed a teasing smile to the two hesitant people outside the door, and Luna and Emma looked at each other, and then looked at the room in front of the screaming sound. They covered their faces shyly, pretending to be nonchalant, and took small steps, and quickly entered the room middle. As promised, the next day, a manor in Windsor Castle was immediately remodeled. Within a week, a full-time semi-military school named Windsor College was established. The first batch of students enrolled was the heir of the United Kingdom, His Royal Highness Charles Tudor, Prince of Wales, who was only 5 years old, and his half-brothers, 7-year-old Henry Tudor and Adam Tudor, and John Tudor and George Tudor at the same age, of course. More importantly, their sisters, 7-year-old Alice Tudor, and 5-year-old Isabella Tudor. As a result, this has aroused strong repercussions among the nobles. The son of the Duke of Norfolk, the son of the Earl of Argyll, the grandson of the Earl of Allen, and even the noble children of the right age, are rushing to enter this academy. In this regard, Edward also thinks it is a good opportunity. After all, these noble children will be regarded as members of the ruling class in the future, and it is good to get in touch with them early. Therefore, His Majesty the King stipulated that only noble children who are barons and above, and who are between 7 and 10 years old, can enter. Among them, cabinet members also have a recommendation quota, which is the privilege of being a cabinet boss. Even so, there are more than 100 noble children of the right age. This can also be regarded as the base for cultivating nobles. In order to make these future ruling classes better, His Majesty the King has invited some academicians from Oxford University and Cambridge University, as well as the Royal Academy of Sciences, to teach them mathematics, Latin, English, astronomy, geography, history, horseback riding, archery, etiquette, painting, debate, and the basics of heraldry that nobles must learn in this era. Every noble has its own coat of arms, which has become a symbol of nobility even if you don't know each other. The coat of arms has become the best intermediary for getting to know each other. Every noble must memorize at least 100 coats of arms in his lifetime, so that he can be regarded as a real noble. 12 courses are enough to make them want to die, and to apply what they have learned. For nobles, although the importance of blood is still dominant, the importance of talent is becoming more and more prominent, especially when commoners enter the officialdom through examinations and compete with them for power. The competition between nobles and commoners became more intense. The two factions fight, but the king wins in the end. Of course, the biggest breakthrough of Windsor College is that it includes women. Although men and women are taught separately, it is a major breakthrough, that is to say, in this era. Besides the monastery, the way for female nobles to receive education has added a Windsor College. The move to separate schools for men and women has aroused great repercussions among the nobles. Among the nobles, there are both opponents and supporters, but the opposition is invalid, and the king's order cannot be questioned. Chapter 460. The Archbishop of Canterbury. In the autumn of 1562, London began to rain a little bit, which did not bring any cold, but the autumn wind was sweeping, rampaging on the wide London streets, bringing endless difficulties to pedestrians and hawkers. Even the patrolling urban management and policemen wrapped their clothes tightly, let go of the daggers they usually show off, and patrolled the streets tremblingly. Urban management are generally scattered in groups, walking in 2s and 3s, looking around from time to time to see if there are businesses setting up stalls in violation of regulations, or residents dumping rubbish indiscriminately. But the police usually form a team of 3. Although there is no queue, their pace is very steady, and their eyes are like torches, giving people a sense of strictness and deterrence. But both have a characteristic: no matter who they are, the pedestrians on the road will quickly give way to let these old men walk fast, as if they are avoiding some devil. On the contrary, the city management officers and the police were complacent and regarded it as their exclusive privilege because in London, even the ministers of the cabinet and the nobles of the House of Lords can punish without scruple if they violate the law. Nobles and ministers are not their immediate superiors, and cannot deal with them, if they must be made to look good then. The only thing left is to go to the London Court of Appeals, however, which nobles and ministers would sue a few policemen or city management regardless of face. "Hey, buddy, how many little thieves have you caught today?" Two city management officers who were wandering around boredly couldn't help asking when they saw the police patrolling with blank faces. "Hey, what can there be? It took a whole morning to catch a thief, and the rest of the time was patrolling." "It was cold and boring," one of the shorter police officers said, pursing his lips helplessly, shaking his head. "Damn the weather, it's really annoying." The urban management staff straightened their hats and cursed in disgust in the center of the wide road, only they were chatting unscrupulously, while the crowd looked at their backs timidly and pointed. They turned their eyes around and whispered to each other, but no one dared to stand up and say a word. What's more, the carriages in the rear, intimidated by their power, could only drive slowly and cautiously from both sides of the road. Violent law enforcement agencies are just that scary at this time. Suddenly the clinking of horseshoes and the sound of wheels grinding the ground came from the ears of the urban management and police officers, and it seemed that the speed was not slowing down. Full of momentum, hearing the sound, they turned around quickly and took a look. An extremely large and beautiful carriage was driving at a constant speed, as if they hadn't seen them around the carriage. Several people dressed as knights guarded the surroundings, with helmets covering their heads, leaving only their eyes outside, and only the deep eyes and the indomitable momentum could be seen. But when they saw the patterns and badges on the carriage, they immediately opened their mouths wide, with surprised expressions on their faces. Then, before the passers-by could react, they had already quickly walked to the side of the road, lowered their heads, bent down, with respectful expressions on their faces, which did not have the fearless expression just now. The passers-by looked carefully at the coat of arms on the carriage, and they were sure that it was not the carriage of a nobleman or a minister. "Who is in the carriage?" Some of the more knowledgeable ones made the same movement clearly and quickly, bowing their heads respectfully, as if they were devout believers. The uneven bricks on the ground made a cuckoo sound, and other people followed suit and made respectful movements, and they didn't dare to look up at all. "Bless you, St. Augustine. Bless you, Holy See." When the carriage passed by, there were prayers on both sides of the road, which was the sound of people's piety. But the carriage didn't intend to stop. It didn't even look at these respectful crowd. It just passed by and continued towards the destination. "Your Holy See, it seems that the citizens of London are still devout to our Lord, and they don't care about the content of the Trento Conference in Rome." Inside the carriage, a middle-aged priest in a black cassock was sitting in the carriage, and said happily to a middle-aged man in a purple cassock with half-closed eyes, "The reconvened Council of the Catholic Church in Trento, Northern Italy. This meeting is the most important ecumenical meeting of the Catholic Church." The reason for this meeting was Martin Luther's religious reformation. Some people described this meeting as a counter-reformation plan, because it represented the attitude of the Catholic Church towards religious reformation. Not long ago, Pope Pius IV reconvened the long-interrupted Council of Trent, and declared that all Protestantism is heresy. In other words, the Catholic Church has excommunicated these Protestants in name, and they are already heretics. It's no wonder that the middle-aged priests around him value the attitude of London citizens so much. Believers were the foundation of their Anglican sect. Just like a few years ago, the Calvin sect secretly developed believers to preach in England, which greatly shocked the senior management of the Anglican sect. Catholicism is not terrible, because it does not like the king, but other Protestants will compete with them for more believers and rights. Fortunately, His Majesty the King made a lightning strike and dispatched these Calvinists to Ireland in one fell swoop, and once again promulgated a law emphasizing the orthodoxy and uniqueness of Anglicanism, which made them breathe a sigh of relief afterwards. The Anglican sect took action immediately. In the places where the Calvin sect was active, they conducted extensive Bible readings and interpretations, and held a huge mass, which saved many believers. Why don't you know? It's because the news didn't reach London. After all, common people are different from us, the current Archbishop of Canterbury, Matthew Burke, said blankly, choking the priest until he was speechless. The Archbishop of Canterbury, also known as the Holy See of Canterbury, succeeded St. Augustus in the apostolic system. With the Reformation of Henry VIII, the King of England became the religious head of Anglicanism, and the Archbishop of Canterbury was the actual leader. After the establishment of the United Kingdom, Anglicanism became the state religion of the United Kingdom and the only legal religion. and the Archbishop of Canterbury also became the second in command and the actual leader of the religious circles of the United Kingdom under the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of York in England, the Archbishop of Edinburgh in Scotland, the Archbishop of Wales, Wales is the Principality, and the Archbishop of Dublin in Ireland are all deputies and cooperate with the Archbishop of Canterbury to manage the Anglican sect throughout the United Kingdom. I don't know what His Majesty's plan is. Your Excellency, the Archbishop got the news that not only him, but several other archbishops also came to London, ready to be received by the King. P.S. I recommend a new book, The Bulgarian Empire. You can read it. Chapter 461, The Synod of Bishops. London, Whitehall Palace. Inside the meeting hall, the huge curtains have been pulled up by the servants, and the thin sunlight is difficult to penetrate through the brightly colored glass, bringing a little warmth to the dark room. A long table was placed in the center, on which the servants carefully arranged flower and fruit platters, which contrasted with a long dark red table, looked very pleasing to the eye. The Archbishop of Edinburgh, Hobbs, was ushered into the meeting room by the waiter. When he looked up, he saw such a bright scene. The pots of flowers carefully decorated in the room made the whole meeting room a little warmer. Seeing this, he froze for a moment, then nodded again, and was led to a position before he sat down safely. Then came the Archbishop of Wales, a plump old man with a very friendly look. Hobbs nodded towards him, as did the Archbishop of Wales, and the two smiled kindly afterwards. Several people came in one after another, all wearing purple cassocks. Archbishop Level. The Archbishop of York looked cold, with an expression of indifference. He was deputy to the Archbishop of Canterbury in England, and after the Archbishop of Canterbury was in charge of religious affairs in the United Kingdom. The Archbishop of York became the rector of religion in England. Then there's the Archbishop of Dublin from Ireland, who is in charge of the religious affairs of the island of Ireland. His most conspicuous place is that he has a black mole near his chin, which is extremely conspicuous. The entry of the Archbishop of Canterbury made all the bishops stand up and salute. As the leader of the religious essence of the whole United Kingdom, he deserves everyone to do so. The Archbishop of Canterbury also bowed back in a friendly manner, showing a smile, and then calmly sat on the right-hand side of the Lord, with no expression on his face. After everyone arrived, the servants filed in and placed a cup of green tea in front of their tables. What is good at the top will be effective at the bottom. His Majesty the King liked to drink tea, and the nobles and officials also fell in love with it overnight, which abruptly made the already expensive tea even more unacceptable after seeing the strong demand for English tea. Tea merchants flocked here and made a lot of profits. Although the tea leaves changed 3 times a day, it just tickled the itch of nobles and officials. The more expensive, the more sought after. As a result, within a few years, drinking tea became popular in the upper class of the entire United Kingdom, and gradually penetrated into the middle class. Facing the tea on the table, several archbishops tasted it shallowly, their eyes lit up, and after taking another sip, they put it down, closed their eyes, and began to savor the beauty of it. Sure enough, the tea from the Wang family's royal family is better. Everyone sighed in unison, filled with emotion. As there are only a few hobbies left, His Majesty the King certainly cannot destroy them. After paying a lot of money to buy a few packs of Chinese tea seeds, I selected a few alpine and hilly areas with continuous mist, and carefully cultivated them for several years. Finally, 3 years ago, a tea species suitable for England was cultivated. And then the planting area was slowly expanded. This year, the royal family's tea tree area has reached 2,000 acres, and they harvest 200,000 pounds of ordinary tea each year. Among them, only more than 5,000 pounds of high-grade tea is produced each year, and the top-quality tea is only about 50 pounds. Just after the spring of this year, the Royal Tea Garden officially launched the White Rose series of teas, which were very popular in the market. After so many years, the habit of drinking tea has been cultivated. It is conservatively estimated that there are hundreds of thousands of people in the entire United Kingdom. Moreover, these people are either merchants or local gentlemen and nobles. Even if merchants deliver a lot, the high price and small volume cannot meet the needs of many people. The 200,000 pounds of tea leaves released by the royal family were sold out in less than a month at a price of £10 per pound. Among them, most of them were bought by the English, and the rest were bought by merchants and rushed to sell in the continent of Europe. The tea alone brought an income of £2 million to the royal family, which is the 3-year income of the royal family in normal years. As a result, His Majesty the King became more enthusiastic about cultivating a nationwide tea-drinking movement and wantonly expanded tea plantations. Seeing the profits, the nobles began to enter the tea garden industry one after another, and the tea industry became the hottest money-making industry in the United Kingdom. For a while ordinary tea was drunk by gentlemen and squires, while high-grade tea was the daily drink of noble officials. As for the top-quality tea, except for the royal family and nobles who have been specially rewarded, ordinary people really can't drink it. Off topic. After the archbishops took their seats, His Majesty the King arrived belatedly. Your Majesty. Everyone stood up in unison and said respectfully. Edward glanced at the five of them, then nodded and sat down. Everyone should have received the news. The Council of Trent, under the auspices of Pius IV, recently announced that all Protestants would be regarded as heresies, and our Anglican sect is also a member of Protestants. Do you have any suggestions? ? His Majesty the King looked expressionlessly at the several high-ranking religious officials in the United Kingdom, and announced an important news. When the archbishops heard the news, they didn't show much surprise on their faces. Instead, each of them showed a pensive look. Your Majesty, as well as other archbishops, I think we must respond to such actions of the Roman Church. Archbishop Hobbes of Edinburgh, who has always been indecisive, was the first to speak, and he also spoke fiercely, which greatly exceeded everyone's expectations, including His Majesty the King. Then, after everyone thought about his Catholic background and the situation in Scotland, everyone suddenly realized Scotland was originally in the Catholic camp. After it could not submit to the Anglican sect, it became the most anti-Roman region in the entire United Kingdom. For example, after the traitors took refuge in the Japanese invaders, in order to gain trust, they even intensified their cruelty to the people of the country. After feeling everyone's collective gaze, Archbishop Hobbes sat down slowly, but his face still maintained the original resolute expression. Afterwards, the entire meeting room fell silent again, so everyone turned their attention to the seated Archbishop of Canterbury, Matthew Burke. The skinny Archbishop felt everyone's attention, so he had no choice but to stand up and speak. Your Majesty, Bishop Hobbes' opinion is correct, and I support his suggestion. As he said that, he looked around for a week, looked at the expressions on everyone's faces, bowed to His Majesty the King, and continued with a blank expression. I propose that our Anglican sect should unite with the Huguenots in France, the Calvinists in Switzerland, and the Lutheran sect in Germany to jointly express our dissatisfaction and opposition to the opinions of the Roman Council. At the end, he uttered a deafening voice, also, let's kick the Pope out of the Church together. Kicking out the Pope's membership means that Protestantism has truly parted ways with Catholicism from now on. P.S. After reading it, you big brothers, please vote for encouragement. I don't understand why chapter 470 blocked a few paragraphs. Others are more straightforward than me, but it's still fine, so someone must have reported it. Alice! ! Have no choice. Chapter 462 Anglican Cleansing Movement. When everyone was shocked by His Excellency the Archbishop's speech, the young king showed no expression, but showed a smug smile on religious matters. How could His Majesty the King not consult with the Archbishop of Canterbury in advance? After the Archbishop of Canterbury finished speaking, the scene fell silent, and the other bishops were too shocked to speak afterwards. Everyone caught a glimpse of His Majesty the King, and nodded their heads in agreement. The first item is so easy to pass up. After the Archbishop of Canterbury sat down, His Majesty the King nodded slightly towards him, and the two smiled knowingly, without saying anything. The reason why I called you here this time is not only about the affairs of Rome, but also to ask you about the situation of the Anglican sect in various places. His Majesty the King took a sip of tea, glanced at them intentionally or unintentionally, and said slowly, Archbishop of York, talk to me first. Bishop of York, who was named, squeezed out a smile towards the king, with a straight face, and said word by word, Catholicism and other Protestant religions are at the moment under our pressure in various parts of England. If it is conservatively estimated, the number of people who often go to church to pray en masse has already occupied 6 floors of the population of England. Anglicanism has become the main belief of the English people. After decades of religious reform in England, most of the population has accepted Anglicanism, so there is no need to urge them anymore, and the rest of the time will come naturally. The same is true for Wales. Most nobles and commoners have fully accepted Anglicanism, and Catholics are no longer a threat. The Archbishop of Wales said softly in a gentle tone, the voice hit the ear, as if an old man was exhorting. It was extraordinarily kind. Of course, most of the Scottish Catholics have already accepted Anglicanism. The remaining members are just dregs. They will return naturally in a short time. Please rest assured, I will definitely let them have a real home. As soon as Archbishop Hobbes stood up, he felt a little out of breath. It has not been a few years since the Scottish Reformation, and most ignorant civilians still believe in Catholicism. The belief habits of hundreds of years are not so easy to change. Therefore, Bishop Hobbs quickly patted his chest and promised loudly, trying to prove the strength of himself and the Church of Scotland regarding this. Edward was non-committal. The Anglican sect is the sect most similar to the Catholic Church among the Protestants. Except for the leaders and some ceremonies, the rest are basically the same. Therefore, among all Protestant denominations, Anglicanism is the easiest sect to convert Catholics in the process of transformation. The biggest resistance has always been the teaching staff. As long as the teaching staff cooperates, ignorant civilians can easily change. Therefore, during the period of Henry VIII, decrees were issued more than once, requiring the priests to be loyal to the king, change their positions in a timely manner, and it is strictly forbidden to flirt with Rome. Therefore, as long as the bishops of the Church of Scotland have their heart towards the royal family, the whole of Scotland will be like England in a few years. The situation in Ireland is a bit special. The tone of the Archbishop of Dublin was even weaker than that of the Bishop Hobbs of Scotland, and even his back seemed less straight. He looked around for a while, and then continued, except for the Dublin area, Ireland is composed of Calvinism, Catholics, and other sects. Although the Anglican sect occupies the main advantage, it will directly transform the entire island of Ireland. Please forgive me, Your Majesty, there is nothing we can do. At the end of speaking, he looked at His Majesty the King with resentful eyes. The complaints inside were like an abyss, and the young king smiled embarrassedly. As the largest sewage outlet in the empire, Ireland has pagans, criminals, and even mobs who disobey the rule, and there are also a large number of Celtic tribesmen. It can be said that the society is extremely complicated. Under such circumstances, it is not bad for the Anglican sect to maintain its advantage. If the real situation is followed, the Catholic Church has a real advantage, and His Majesty the King, who caused such a complicated situation, naturally cannot force it. The environment does not allow it. That being said, after all, Ireland is an important part of the United Kingdom, and Anglicanism is the state religion of the United Kingdom. Of course, Ireland cannot lag behind too much. The Archbishop of Canterbury, instead of His Majesty the King, turned to the Archbishop of Dublin and spurred, "Yes, Your Excellency the Holy See, I will fight for it." The Archbishop of Dublin took a light breath and agreed, "Well, it's best like this." His Majesty the King nodded and agreed. "Everyone, the state religion of the United Kingdom is Anglicanism, there is no doubt about it. And it is your unshirkable responsibility to convey the glory of our Lord. I hope you will take it to heart." In the end, His Majesty the King closed the coffin and concluded suddenly, just when everyone thought the topic was over and the atmosphere fell silent again. His Majesty the King began to speak again. "Last year, within the Church, more than 10 bishops and more than 100 deacons committed corruption and betrayed the faith of our Lord, and were dismissed and sentenced." His Majesty the King opened his eyes wide, looked at these serious and surprised archbishops, and said sadly, "The behavior of these people will never be forgiven." Although the bishops showed shock on their faces, they didn't take it seriously in their hearts. What happened to some gold coins? As the Lord's shepherds, these gold coins are not enough to cover their contribution, but His Majesty the King said no, and in recent years, he has seized the valve of corruption. Whether it is righteousness or reason, the archbishops should cooperate in order to eliminate or reduce this kind of behavior. I propose to set up a synod of archbishops to supervise the entire church, and to start meetings at the end of each year. Moreover, 3 levels of the annual income of churches across the kingdom will be turned over to the Archbishop Conference for the development and growth of the entire Anglican sect, and everyone sitting here will be one of the members of the Archbishop Conference. Do you have any comments? Hearing this, the bishops bowed their heads and began to meditate. What His Majesty the King said about monitoring corruption is pure fart. The most important thing is to make more money, and to make money through the Conference of Archbishops. But this Conference of Bishops is also beneficial to them, and they can use their supervisory power to expand their power. Although they are said to be archbishops, they actually only control the area at hand. For example, the Archbishop of York only controls the Diocese of York, and only has the right to advise, not control, the bishops of other dioceses. After thinking about it, all the bishops nodded in agreement, and the Anglican sect carried out another cleaning campaign, and made a lot of benefits for the king. P.S. I recommend a foreign history master, The Age of Dawn of the Conquest of Heaven by Solid Bear. The writing is good. If you still have a shortage of books, you can search for Euxin, the starting point book shortage list. There are all kinds of books. Chapter 463, The Negotiations Breakdown. Hey, the summer sun is like a stove, scorching hot, baking the whole land. causing heat waves after waves, torturing the working people outside the city of Rouen, the capital of Normandy. A large number of captives were wearing single clothes and thin shirts. Under the scorching sun above their heads, they were taking heavy steps, picking up dirt from a distance, and walking towards the city wall. These Catholic captives, nobles with armor on their bodies, have been pulled down long ago. Throwing a linen singlet, let them rest and enjoy the cool in the cell, not having to enjoy the hot weather and hard work. It can be regarded as giving them face and enjoying. The nobles treated the other ordinary soldiers basically had no choice but to put on a sad face, obeying the arrangement, stepping heavily step by step, carrying clay, making an outstanding contribution to the restoration of the city of Rouen in order to prevent the Catholic allies from attacking again, and to fulfill the agreement. Knight Alexander held talks with Count Gabriel, which included, the city of Rouen must surrender half of its control to the British Army. The British Army must also send no less than 3,000 reinforcements within a month to support the Protestant army fighting against the Catholic allies. Therefore, this group of captured Catholic allies could only carry the burden and pull the spoil to contribute to the construction of the city wall. Originally, Earl Gabriel planned to recruit some Catholic allies to supplement his troops. However, Knight Alexander, who had other plans, refused without hesitation, and the reasons given were also very convincing. These soldiers who believe in the Roman Catholic Church are definitely not firm in their will to follow the Protestantism. When the two armies are fighting, they will definitely retreat and defect. It is better to abandon them and let them build a city wall in this way. Earl Gabriel originally wanted to add some strength to strengthen the Protestant strength in Rouen, and his plan was completely bankrupt after all. Most of the captives were in the hands of the British Army. Hey! Hey! The captives were sweating, chanting slogans, moving their feet, and started to work with his mouth open. Molin panted heavily, looking helplessly at the city wall in front of him, carrying a load of fired bricks on his shoulders, weighing 50 or 60 pounds, and moved his feet for him at the age of 16. This kind of weight is not a problem in normal times, but what he ate in his stomach this morning has already been consumed by the heavy work he did all morning. What he is most looking forward to now is the arrival of noon, so that he can enjoy the life of the night master and eat 3 meals a day. The companions around him also had the same idea with him, so they worked hard and conscientiously. If they didn't see that they were eating well, they would have run away long ago. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Just when Molin's footsteps followed the steps in front of him and moved mechanically, there was a burst of slogans in his ears, and he couldn't help turning his head to look. I saw a group of young British soldiers in red and white, with sweat streaming from their foreheads, circling around the entire army of captive workers. The military uniforms on their bodies were soaked in sweat, and the muskets on their backs were also glowing red from the sun. It seemed that the temperature was very high, and the damage was high. A team of more than 200 people formed a small square team, walking in neat steps, shouting slogans, looking straight ahead, and running. Even if it wasn't the first time he saw them, Molin still felt sympathy for them in his heart. Running in such hot weather was even worse than them. After carefully looking at the matchlock guns on their shoulders for a few more times, after sighing a few words in their hearts, they walked mechanically and started walking. While walking, Molin thought about what happened in the captive camp recently. Several priests, called priests in Protestantism, have been promoting Anglican beliefs in their ranks in England, calling on everyone to abandon Romanism and convert to Anglicanism. More importantly, the English announced that as long as they converted to Anglicanism, they could not only escape heavy work every day, but also get wages, and eat meat every few days. In this way, after a few days, many people could not stand the temptation and could only choose to convert. Molin reckoned that there were probably hundreds of them. Chucking his mouth, he also became greedy at this moment. Meat. I haven't eaten it for a long time, and I almost forgot the specific taste. I really want to eat it, but the belief he had built up in his heart for more than 10 years made him hesitate. After shaking his head, Molin stopped thinking about it. Let's talk about it after lunch. While the captives were working hard and the soldiers were sweating and running, Knight Alexander was conducting new military training in the city of Rouen. England is different from France. England is rainy, the air is humid, and the temperature is relatively low all year round. The soldiers are used to the weather in England, and since coming to France, especially in France in summer, the English are very uncomfortable with this kind of weather. As the summer progressed, more and more English soldiers suffered from heat stroke. The doctors accompanying the army spent a lot of energy and money, and finally cured most of the heat stroke patients. In the end, more than 100 English soldiers passed away. Regrettably, fortunately, the regulations in the army stipulate that drinking unboiled water is not allowed, Otherwise more soldiers will die in view of the possibility that his army will stay in Normandy for a long time in the future. Knight Alexander decided to let all soldiers undergo adaptive training, that is to say, soldiers who have recovered and have not suffered from heat stroke will receive high temperature training, and slowly began to try the food and water in the Normandy area to adapt to the body from the very beginning of walking at noon, then training activities, and then running. The soldiers in England suffered the most severe training in their lives and their hearts. This is as if it is different from hell. The Alexander Knight also knew that the long-term suppression and the foreign troops fighting in foreign countries should not suppress the army too hard, otherwise camp roars and mutinies would follow one after another, and he, the commander, would be in danger. Therefore, after surrendering most of Normandy and supplying some food and military expenses, especially after occupying the Normandy granary manger township, the British army became richer than ever. The Knights of Alexander, who had no desires and desires, naturally would not enjoy these wealth alone. And it was impossible to stay in the army and get moldy at noon every day. The Knights of Alexander would order some pigs and sheep to be slaughtered and made into broth to supply the harshly trained British soldiers, and you must know that at this time, even the knights in the country don't see much meat every week, and for the British soldiers, who are mostly civilians, eating broth every day is already a nobleman's life up. So, the soldiers of the United Kingdom in Normandy lived through the pain and happiness every day in Paris. The Duke of Guise used the name of the king to request the supply of food and taxes from all over the country to recruit a large number of soldiers. It's just that this time the target is no longer the city of Rouen in Normandy, but the Protestant army from Orleans. Yes, the Duke of Guise rejected the offer of peace talks. The high-level Huguenots in Orleans, after heated discussions, also rejected the peace talks proposal. Moreover, the Huguenots also sent envoys into the city of Paris. The envoy came to the city of Paris carelessly, brazenly demanded the surrender of the entire Catholic League, and put forward a series of requirements. In particular, the requirement that the Huguenots legally hold Mass and pray and build churches angered the entire Catholic League. The Duke of Guise angrily tore up the letter of persuasion and started a new round of civil war. I didn't update my cold yesterday. Who knows that the recommended votes for the past 2 days have dropped to single digits? Helpless and heartbroken. Chapter 464. The ambition of Philip I. Male Sebes, the fringe of the Isle de France, became the place of confrontation between the Catholic and Protestant allies. This time, the Duke of Guise took the passive position and stayed in the city, while the Protestant army chose to besiege the city and take the initiative. In fact, when the Duke of Guise attacked Rouen, although the Protestant army, led by Prince Condé, withdrew from Paris, they captured many Isle de France sites. After the Duke of Guise returned, he withdrew from Isle de France. The so-called Isle de France, although surrounded by rivers, is not a real island, but an administrative region of France, and it is also the most quintessential part of France. In 987 AD, Capet became king, and the area he ruled is what is known today as Isle de France. Before King Philip I of France, that is to say, during the period of the 6 monarchs of the Capet dynasty, nearly 200 years, but the king was trapped on the Isle de France like a prisoner, helpless to the vast ocean around him. Isle de France refers to the actual area that the early kings of the Capet dynasty could effectively control, including the narrow strip in the middle reaches of the Seine and Loire rivers, centered on Paris and Orleans, and its area only accounts for about 1/15 of the land of France outside the island. There are many princes who are stronger than the royal family, such as the Duchy of Normandy, the Duchy of Burgundy, and the Duchy of Aquitaine. Even in the island, there are many castle owners who do not obey the rules. After taking back the Isle de France, the Duke of Guise led the army and began to confront the Protestantism. Les Sebes is a small city with more than 2,000 people. In France, which has a population of tens of millions, it is considered a small city with more than 2 people. In England, it has become a big city. The Duke of Guise led the peasants and soldiers recruited from the Isle de France, as well as Catholic nobles and knights soldiers at all levels, and the number reached tens of thousands. Again, start a new French civil war with the Protestants. It stands to reason that with a population of 18 million in France, it is trivial to organize an army of 100,000 scale, but unfortunately, there is insufficient funds. Therefore, for such a long time, the civil war has maintained a scale of tens of thousands, which cannot be compared with the hundreds of thousands of troops in China. In France in August, the sky was still clear and the sun was shining, but the light was too intense, which made the Catholic soldiers standing on the city wall sweat profusely and couldn't open their eyes. The Duke of Guise, who was wearing a high-grade silk underwear and a light coat over his body, lifted the binoculars with ease and looked at the Protestant army outside the city. Unlike facing the English hastily, He looked relaxed when facing his defeated Protestant army. Although Prince Condé fought alongside him and fought fiercely against the Spaniards, he lost more than he won, but his courage was commendable. Not to mention Coligny, an admiral, left the ship to command the army. Is this a joke? This is the best joke the Duke of Guise has heard in so many years. In addition, the quality of Protestant and Catholic allies is also different. The Catholic allied forces consisted of local aristocratic knights as the backbone, supplemented by farmers and soldiers, but the Protestant army was not the case. They only got a small number of nobles to follow, and they were inferior to the Catholic allies in terms of quality. But they have an unexpected ally. Looking carefully at the lazy and uneven Protestant army in the barracks outside the city, the Duke of Guise put down the binoculars in his hand and sighed. Antoine, what do you think of the Huguenot army in front of you? A trace of unwillingness flashed across the Duke of Guise's face. Then he turned around and asked King Navarre and Duke of Vendôme, Antoine Bourbon. Beside him, the Duke of Vendôme squinted his eyes, looked at the Protestant army in front of the city, shook his head in disdain, and said, although the number of Huguenot troops has exceeded 20,000, the number of armored troops is less than 1,000, and the number of artillery pieces is only 10. Compared with ours, it is still inferior. It's ridiculous to say that in this era, the power of matchlock guns can only deal with unarmored peasants and soldiers. For those armored attendants and knights, if they exceed 30 meters, they will be invisible, which is not as accurate as arrows in power. In this way, the Catholic allies, supported by most of the French nobles, are naturally much more powerful. That's right. In my eyes, the Huguenots are naturally not a threat. It won't take long before I beat them to pieces like mud on the ground. The Duke of Guise smiled triumphantly and agreed, but while speaking, he sighed again. However, at this time, our threat is not them, but the Englishmen hundreds of miles away. Speaking of the English, Antoine couldn't help but think of the scene of being attacked that day. Countless matchlock guns faced them, the neat phalanx, and the thick sulfur-smelling smoke all impressed Antoine deeply. He frowned and nodded in agreement. In this way, the interest of the two of them just now was shattered, and their faces were extremely ugly at this time. The new royal palace in Madrid was built on a high hill on the Manzanares River, and in a blink of an eye it was a small canyon. The hunting wind was blowing away the heat of summer. Queen Mary was on a lawn, chatting with several high-ranking Spanish nobles, discussing their parenting experience from time to time, looking very happy. On the side, Prince Charles is 5 years old, with his calves, and several other young noble children of the same age, chasing on the grass, laughing happily. It's just that the maid serving on the side was too busy, so she had to run while serving not far from them. The helm of the Habsburg dynasty, the defender of Catholicism, His Majesty King Philip I of Spain, was discussing the situation in France with his ministers. Your Majesty, the current situation in France is very unfavorable to the Catholic League. The English attacked Brittany and defeated the Duke of Guise outside Rouen, thereby occupying Normandy in one fell swoop. The English are within reach of the French crown. The palace minister bent slightly, facing the ruler of the Habsburg dynasty, and reported softly, Your Excellency, how is the kingdom's finances? Philip I had a calm expression on his face. He also had great ideas about the French crown, and he had ambition since Charles V, but this opportunity was taken by the English, but he was not reconciled, so he asked the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Well, Your Majesty, the taxes for the first half of the year have already arrived, but the loans of the Genoese businessmen and Dutch businessmen who borrowed last year have to be returned. The Minister of Finance glanced at His Majesty the King and said helplessly, There is no rush to pay back the money from those businessmen. As long as France is conquered, you can have as much as you want. Philip I shook his hand and said domineeringly, Prince, immediately issue a summons order in my name, requesting the nobles to gather troops and attack France together. The palace minister glanced helplessly at His Majesty the King and agreed, thinking that even the English can defeat the French, and the strength of the French has declined so much. Then he can go straight in and take down Paris. It is indeed a joy to add a French crown to my head. Thinking about it, Philip I showed a smile. As for the Cateau-Cambrésis peace treaty signed a few years ago, Philip I never took it to heart. Just when His Majesty the King was so ambitious and was about to devour France in one fell swoop, a guard ran over hurriedly. Looking at his anxious footsteps, Philip I had an ominous premonition. Chapter 465 Killing two birds with one stone. Ding dong dong. As a guard in the palace and one of the few noble children in Spain, Butchico has always kept etiquette in mind, and it has been engraved in his bones. However, when he got the news, he still couldn't help showing a look of shock in his heart, and his footsteps became a little unsteady. His face was pale, his footsteps were a little floating, and he looked a little overindulgent. When he entered the lawn and disturbed His Majesty the King and the ministers, the noble children like him couldn't help laughing, but Chaka didn't care so much, and went straight to His Majesty the King, bent down, and saluted. Your Majesty, please forgive my impoliteness, but the current situation makes people forget about etiquette. As an excellent king, Philip I didn't care about Trabuca's disrespectful behavior. He only cared about what kind of news made him, a noble guard who abides by etiquette, lose his sense of proportion. Philip I stared at the respectful guards in front of him, frowned slightly, and asked eagerly, I forgive your behavior, but, my guard, please tell me, what happened? Hearing Philip I's question, Butchik immediately raised his head, calmed down, and said, Your Majesty, a mob has rebelled in the Netherlands. At present, Amsterdam has been captured. Hearing this, Philip I was taken aback. He was not surprised by the Dutch riots, but was surprised that the Dutch had the strength to capture Amsterdam, which is the central city of the North Netherlands. The Netherlands region includes present-day northeastern France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Belgium. In the 16th century, it was the economic center of the entire Europe and was also known as the Low Countries. There are more than 300 cities in the small Netherlands, with a population of more than 3 million. The land is fertile and the business is developed. The annual tax paid to the Kingdom of Spain has reached 6 million ducats, accounting for more than half of the Kingdom of Spain taxation at this time. England has several times the land and the population is comparable to that of the Netherlands, and with the addition of Scotland, Ireland and other places, the tax contribution of the entire United Kingdom is not as much as 1/10 of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is the handicraft center of the whole of Europe. Even the woolen fabrics made in England are sent to the Netherlands for printing, dyeing and coloring. This is why Britain's international status is not high at this time as the pillar of the imperial economy. After Philip I inherited the empire of Charles V, he never let it go. Is the Duchess of Parma doing anything? Philip I was shocked, and then asked quickly with a cold face, before I got the news, I didn't know the governor's move. Butchik replied softly, the Duchess of Parma is the illegitimate daughter of Charles V and the sister of Philip I, who has won the trust of Philip I in the eyes of the king. His elder sister is the most suitable subordinate, because she will execute her orders meticulously, stabilize the Netherlands, and contribute a steady stream of taxes to the kingdom. Hearing that his sister didn't take any action or implement any effective measures, Philip I shook his head in disappointment. Sure enough, when a woman encounters any major event, she will be at a loss. At this time, the Minister of Finance, Roy Gomez de Hile, was also shocked. As the king's important minister, he certainly understood what the loss of the Netherlands meant to the kingdom. Your Majesty, the Netherlands is very important to the kingdom. Huge taxation is the pillar that supports the dignity of the kingdom. The current situation in the Netherlands is complicated and confusing. Peace talks are still the main focus. The economy of the Netherlands cannot be damaged in the slightest. When the power of the elderly palace minister was gradually emptied, the Minister of Finance Roy Gomez de Hire and the Duke of Avar, Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, became the most trusted nobles of Philip I. Minister. The finance minister, who had always been prudent and prudent, saw very clearly that in the face of France and the Ottoman Empire, the Netherlands, which supported the kingdom's huge expenditures, was of great importance. Please consider carefully, a war-ravaged Netherlands is of no use to the kingdom. At present, the most important thing is to deal with the Huguenots in France. As he said that, the Chancellor looked at the king expectantly, and threw out the French war in distress to change the king's mind. Your Majesty, those conspiring rebels should have been hanged a long time ago. We can't treat them too leniently. As long as these leaders are killed, the Netherlands will naturally be at peace. Duke Avar glanced at the Minister of Finance, who tried his best to persuade him, his old enemy. He glanced at him dismissively, and said fiercely in this regard. The Minister of Finance was so angry that his neck was thick. After ironing each other with the Duke of Avar for a while, he pushed the problem to Philip I. At this time, the King of Spain was thinking about the importance of the Netherlands and France. If you attack France, the entire south of France is full of Huguenots. If you eat it, you will have a little indigestion. Losing the Netherlands, the entire empire suddenly collapsed, and he was unwilling to face this scene in this way. There is only one option at present, to make the Netherlands become the purse of the kingdom again. Stop talking, Duke Avar. I authorize you to be the new governor of the Netherlands, and you must stabilize the Netherlands. Philip I declared loudly in front of several ministers and palace ministers. The Minister of Finance and the Minister of the Palace turned pale when they heard the words, but the Duke of Avar agreed with high spirits, with indescribable satisfaction on his face, resisting the irritability in his heart. Philip I once again looked up to the direction of France and sighed, "Frenchmen, let you escape again." The uprising broke out in the Netherlands. Of course, it didn't happen by coincidence, but the young king of the United Kingdom of Great Britain personally ordered the intelligence department to act. In fact, 3 years later, that is to say, in 1556, a revolution will still break out in the history of the Netherlands, and an uprising against the Spaniards will continue, which will last for more than 40 years and drain the blood of Spain. Of course, the British just lightly lit a spark in advance. The real factor was the Spaniards, who built the Dutch powder kegs themselves during the time of Charles V. The number of Protestants executed by the Inquisition in the Netherlands reached more than 50,000. In the period of Philip I, economic warfare was used to force the Netherlands to submit. Philip I did not allow the Netherlands to trade with the Spanish colonies, but he made the English cheaper in vain. He increased the purchase price of Spanish wool, forcing a large number of handicraft factories to go bankrupt. As a result, the Dutch bankers suffered heavy losses. His actions did not force the Netherlanders to submit, but aroused opposition from all walks of life in the Netherlandish society at this time. The Netherlands has become a veritable powder keg, and the English are just a little spark. Soon, the news that the Spaniards were preparing to attack the Netherlands reached France, much to the chagrin of the Catholic League and a great surprise to the Huguenots in London, England. The young His Majesty the King couldn't help but be very proud of his handwriting. Igniting the Netherlands in advance will not only allow the United Kingdom to swallow part of the French territory to reduce resistance, but also allow the United Kingdom to weaken the strength of its economic rival. The Netherlands kill two birds with one stone. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 466: The Netherlands Revolution. The Netherlands has two major economic centers, namely Amsterdam in the north and Antwerp in the south, while the political center of the Netherlands is in Brussels. Brussels is located on the banks of the Seine River, with a low-lying Flanders plain in the north and the slightly undulating Brabant Terrace in the south. With an average elevation of 58 meters, Brussels has a history of more than 1,000 years. In 979 AD, Duke Charles, who took the Seine River basin as his fiefdom, chose St. Giry Island in the Seine River as his settlement, built a fortress and a wharf on the island, and built a luxurious residence for himself. The rudimentary form of the city was called Brasserie at that time, which means dwelling on the swamp. In Teutonic, the name Brussels evolved from this due to the convenient river transportation. Goods were collected and distributed here, and the port trade flourished. By the 13th century, it became a handicraft city with a considerable scale, and its woolen fabrics, tapestries and lace were famous all over Europe. Among them, hundreds of years later, Emperor Napoleon of France experienced a battle here, which gave birth to a proverb, Waterloo of life. Due to its unique political status and prosperous economy, Brussels defeated Amsterdam and Amphitheatre and became the center of the Kingdom of Spain, ruling the Netherlands 5 days before Philip I got the news, that is to say, August 3rd. On this day, white clouds appeared in the sky of Brussels, which happened to cover the sun that was still shining brightly just now. For a while, the sky and the earth seemed to darken a lot, which seemed to indicate something. The bustling streets of Brussels did not slow down much because of the weather. People were doing their own business without seeing them. There were shouts, yells, and noises. Everything showed that this political and economic city, although different from the past compared with China, it has been reduced by a few points, but in Europe, it still appears to be prosperous at this time. When people were busy doing business, 3 people wearing beggars' clothes and begging bags suddenly came in front of the city gate. Although they were wearing worn-out beggars' clothes, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that they were just made of high-grade linen. What's more, from them, everyone didn't see that kind of lowly and humble aura, but instead revealed an aristocratic temperament above others, which made passers-by suspicious and focused. After that, he was surrounded and protected by a group of guards. And he seemed to be of extraordinary status for a while. The pedestrians and small traders only regarded this as a play of noble children who had convulsions, and regarded it as a joke since Protestantism spread to the Netherlands. It has been welcomed by most of the Netherlands with small assets, and it has also become a common phenomenon among the nobles. However, Charles V and Philip I, as devout Catholics, naturally did not allow their money bags to get out of control. As a result, the Inquisition was set up to vigorously hunt down Protestants, and the nobles and civilians were silenced for a while. Coupled with this slow economic decline, The entire Netherlands was shrouded in this long-term white terror, and everyone was terrified naturally. The nobles could not endure this kind of ideological control for a long time, so they often acted in rebellious ways as silent resistance while drinking, talking nonsense, and pretending to be a wandering knight, bumping into the street, and so on. Therefore, although a few nobles pretending to be beggars is a bit weird, it is not unacceptable. Everyone stopped to watch the performance of these nobles, which can be regarded as a change in life at this time. Sharp-eyed people recognized them as the great nobleman William Orange, Earl Egmont and General Hoorn, especially William van Orange. He is one of the few nobles in the Netherlands, Prince of Orange, and he is also the ruler of the 3 provinces of the Netherlands, Zeeland, and Utrecht. It can be said that in the entire Netherlands, his prestige and power are only second to the Duchess of Parma, Governor of the Netherlands. He is also a representative figure of the native forces in the Netherlands. Soon, Earl Egmont and General Hoorn were also recognized by people. For a moment, everyone understood that this was not just a performance, but a political show. For a while, the unique political sensitivity of the Brussels people immediately fermented in their hearts. Something big is about to happen in the Netherlands. Just when the Prince of Orange and the other 3 came to the governor's palace in Brussels for a show, the price of food in Brussels immediately rose by 3 levels. Prince Orange looked at the governor's palace in front of him with complicated eyes in his hand. He was holding a petition at this time. This was a petition signed by the nobles of the Netherlands. They demanded, the bloody edict was abolished, the Spanish garrison was withdrawn, 3 levels of parliament were convened, and unpopular Catholic bishops were removed. Soon, the petition passed through the hands of the servants and came to the governor of the Netherlands, Margaret, the Duchess of Parma, as the illegitimate daughter of Charles V and recognized by Charles V. She has received strict elite education since she was a child, and her goal of training as the governor of the Netherlands. Her predecessors, governor of the Netherlands, were Charles V's and Archduchess Margaret of Austria, 1507 to 1530, and Charles V's sister, Queen Mary of Hungary, 1530 to 1555. They have been firmly guarding the Dutch cause for the Habsburg dynasty. It is because of this precedent that the Duchess of Parma can accept the post of governor of the Netherlands during the period of governing the Netherlands. Although the Duchess of Parma has been implementing the orders of her younger brother, she has an open and tolerant attitude towards the Netherlands, which prevents the powder keg of the Netherlands from exploding at this moment. She, who was worrying about the situation in the Netherlands, suddenly received a petition submitted by her most valued subordinate, the Prince of Orange. After reading this petition, Margaret knew that she must not agree. After agreeing to these conditions, Spain really only has nominal ownership of the Netherlands. Apart from tax collection, other rights are undoubtedly lost. In a few days, the Netherlands would be out of Spain's arms, and her long-standing mission of guarding the Habsburg cows would be ruined in her ears. Her father's teachings still echoed, Margaret, the Netherlands will be handed over to you in the future. You must guard it for the Habsburg family. Moreover, she can't forget the sincere support of her younger brother Philip. She knew very well that she was able to become a Grand Duchess from an illegitimate daughter, married a Duke of Parma, and became the governor of the Netherlands because of the trust of her father, Charles V, and younger brother, Philip. She must not live up to this trust and kindness. Bring them in, the Duchess ordered in a deep voice, with a gloomy expression on her face. Soon, the butler invited Prince Orange and others who were standing at the door in. Good day, my Lord Governor. Prince Orange and the other 3 greeted respectfully. The Duchess looked at these dependent subordinates seriously and carefully, and said sadly, you are all my subordinates. Are you all going to become traitors of the Habsburg family? Is it because you don't have enough power in your hands? No, Your Excellency Governor, we are for the sake of all the Dutch people, and also for the future of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. That's why we jointly signed this petition. Please agree to our request and hand it over to the people in Madrid. Your Majesty the King. As the leader, Prince Orange took a step forward, and a gentle voice sounded immediately. No, it's impossible. You still give up this rebellious behavior. I can still forgive you. Don't try to use all the nobles to oppress me. Even if I submit, His Majesty the King of Madrid will never agree. Therefore, your petition is just a piece of paper, saying that the female governor was uncharacteristically speaking with unprecedented sternness, and stared viciously at the few nobles in front of her. Please don't forget that the Netherlands is the territory of the Habsburg family, and the Netherlands belongs to His Majesty Philip II. No one can force him, as well as me, the governor, to do anything against the interests of the Habsburg family. The revolution in the Netherlands 3 years in advance will bring great benefits to England. By the way, I would like to thank Silver Poppy for the great reward, which really encouraged me a lot. Thank you. Chapter 467, The Revolution in the Netherlands. Outside the governor mansion, a large number of spectators surrounded them. They were all attracted by the performances of the Prince of Orange and others. As the political center of the Netherlands, Brussels citizens have a relatively high enthusiasm for politics when they learn that the three local nobles came to the governor's mansion in beggar costumes. The melon eaters also came in a steady stream, ready to see this good show in the governor's palace. The opinions of the Prince of Orange and others were flatly rejected by the female governor, and she continued to reprimand them, warning them to give up such inappropriate behavior outside the mansion. The citizens looked at the closely surrounded governor mansion, talking and pointing. And they were very interested in the performances of several great nobles. After a while, Prince Orange, Earl Egmont and General Horn left the mansion with gloomy faces. Prince Orange turned his head to look at the beggar's outfit on himself, which looked so dazzling at this moment. Glancing at the other onlookers, the Prince of Orange, who was very concerned about his prestige, showed a smile on his face and greeted them a few times, showing his friendly attitude. After saying hello, leaving behind a somewhat cordial smile, he boarded the carriage that had stopped for a long time together with Admiral Horn and Earl Egmont. As soon as they sat down, the faces of the three of them immediately collapsed. Gloomy, Your Excellency General, it seems that the governor has no interest in our petition. We have failed this time. The Prince of Orange has always upheld the principle of silence in front of the Spaniards, and when encountering unavoidable things, he responded with silence, thus earning the nickname Silent Orange. But in front of the nobles of the Netherlands, he is a natural leader, and enjoys a high reputation throughout the nobles and civilians of the Netherlands. Hearing Prince Orange's question, Earl Egmont couldn't help raising his eyebrows, and immediately responded, "Yes, I didn't expect that." The governor was uncharacteristically and resolutely rejected our proposal. He didn't worry about the strength of our noble alliance at all. Speaking of the female governor, Earl Egmont was also depressed. He did not expect that His Excellency the governor's mansion would be so resolute, and there was no room for bargaining. This is just like doing business. There are always back and forth discussions and quarrels, but who knows that the governor has refused, which is too unexpected. HMPH. Admiral Horn said with a cold face, "The Spaniards are in the Netherlands, and the army stationed in Brussels has been eyeing them all the time. How could they think about a proposal?" When the Spanish army was mentioned, the three couldn't help but feel a little discouraged, and they all sighed. The Spanish army is well known throughout Europe, especially the nobles. Of course they know how powerful it is. The Netherlands has been protected by the Habsburg family for decades, and has never suffered any military disasters. There are no soldiers and generals who can fight the Spaniards. Therefore, they still stated their allegiance to Philip II in the petition letter, and they still provided taxes for Spain. However, now, His Excellency the governor is completely ungrateful, regardless of the precarious sentiments of the people of the Netherlands, and is determined to listen to Philip II's words. So, we can only follow the advice of the English and seize Amsterdam. This is the only way we can deal with it." The silent Prince of Orange looked at the two generals, who also looked helpless, and said, "Earl Egmont, with his long-sleeved dancing style, made friends with many middle and lower-level noble officials in the 17 provinces of the Netherlands, and was a famous politician. Admiral Horn is the commander of the native army of the Netherlands and a representative of the military, but the real control of the army is in the hands of Spain, and he represents the army." The Prince of Orange is in the top ranks of the Netherlands and is the lubricant between the Netherlands and Spain. He has important influence in both Spain and the Netherlands. He is also the first person in the Netherlands and a nobleman. The first person of the alliance, the spiritual leader. Hearing the prince's words, Admiral Horn and Earl Egmont thought for a moment, and could only nod their heads in agreement. If you don't agree, you can't do it. The nobles have been suppressed too much by the Spaniards, and after the instigation of the English, the nobles' anger towards the Spaniards is getting stronger and stronger. This time pretending to be a beggar to submit a letter of love is just the last effort of the Prince of Orange and others. It seems that war is inevitable in the end. As a nobleman in business, how could he love war? The three looked at each other, and once again sighed in unison. Amsterdam. The news of the failure of the Prince of Orange and others reached the northern economic center city in less than half a day. Amsterdam is divided into more than 90 islands by 102 canals with a total length of 150 kilometers, connected by 1,286 traditional arch bridges and modern opening and closing bridges, with 16 sluices to adjust the water level, known as the Venice of the North. Especially on the canal, more than 3,000 houseboats are dotted among them, becoming a scene in Amsterdam. The house of Earl Felsen in Amsterdam is very quiet at this time. Completely without the lively atmosphere of the past in the hall, everyone was wandering around. Two people, one was Earl Felsen, and the other was an Englishman. Earl Felson did not mention that the Englishman, with a high nose bridge, blue eyes, long brown hair, and his lips were moving up and down, was talking. It will start later. After everyone completes their tasks, Amsterdam will become our territory. I hope everyone will work hard. The Englishman looked at the Dutch nobles in front of him and said affectionately. The other Dutch people gave him an affirmative look with equal excitement, then saluted Earl Felson, and then exited in an orderly manner. Mr. Anthony, are you sure we will succeed? After all the nobles left, Earl Felson turned around and asked the England in front of him seriously. The Englishman smiled, then squinted at the Earl in front of him, and said, according to what I have learned so far, many factories in the Netherlands have gone bankrupt because of the increase in the purchase price of wool in Spain. Earl, your family's several major textile factories owed a lot of loans because of this. If you continue, within a month, Earl, you will go bankrupt under the bank's recovery. For the current plan, only by driving away the Spaniards can your family avoid the risk of bankruptcy. Anthony looked at the annoyed expression of the Earl in front of him, and said seriously, but, the Spaniards, you don't need to worry so much. Even if you fail, England will be the best safe haven for the Dutch and the Earl, and you can still enjoy a rich life. Anthony interrupted the Count, and said jokingly, seeing the disrespectful behavior of the Englishman in front of him, Earl Felson couldn't help feeling anxious, but in view of his status as the envoy of the King of England, the Earl had no choice but to give up the idea of teaching him destiny. Unfathomable, however, after the nobles left, they organized their scoundrels and warriors one by one, and began to smash the Catholic Church in the streets and alleys of Amsterdam. The same is true in rural areas. Large and small Catholic churches and icons were looted, and a large amount of gold, silver and jewelry were also robbed. The nobles of Amsterdam suddenly made a windfall. The citizens and villagers followed suit and destroyed the holy statues, and the number reached tens of thousands. It seems that monasteries and churches are already substitutes for the Spanish king, and people come to destroy them to vent their dissatisfaction. After that, using the status and influence of the nobility, coupled with the temptation of money, the local soldiers in Amsterdam turned against each other and beheaded the small number of Spanish soldiers one by one at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The mayor of Amsterdam reluctantly announced that Amsterdam was out of the control of Philip II and would no longer pay taxes unless Philip II agrees to the content of the petition and pardons the noble alliance. The Dutch Revolution has officially begun. Chapter 468. However, it is said that there is a civil war, and the Protestant army has been besieging Moleseb for a month. As a small city, it accommodates more than 10,000 soldiers and thousands of citizens. The city is full, and food and water are being consumed rapidly. Although they could be transported continuously from Ile-de-France, the Protestant army continued to attack the food transport team. It can be said that the food in the city is no longer enough, my lord. The food in Moleseb is constantly being consumed. If there is no supplement, we will run out of food. On the side, the young Edgerton looked at the calm Duke of Guise, and said nervously and anxiously. However, his hasty mood did not disturb the mood of the Duke of Guise. He was still standing on the city wall, holding a telescope, and kept observing the opponent's Protestant camp. So, tell me, how long will the current food supply be enough for us? The Duke of Guise continued to stare at the front without looking back, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, and he didn't know what he saw, and his mood began to brighten regarding this. The Adjutant breathed a sigh of relief, turned his head and looked around, fearing that others would hear him, lowered his gaze, and then said softly, currently, there is only enough grain in the granary to feed 10,000 people for a week, and we can last up to 4 days. 4 days? Enough, enough. The Duke of Guise put down the binoculars in his hand, glanced at the young adjutant, patted him on the shoulder, smiled and said, the group of Huguenots, to deal with them. 4 days is already considered a long time. There is no need to worry about the food problem at all. The adjutant looked at the optimistic expression of the Duke of Guise, and his nervous heart immediately relaxed a little, and the expression on his face softened a lot. He didn't wait to ask. This is not what his adjutant should ask. After getting the answer he wants, it will be fine. By the way, Duke Vendôme, what do you think? After finishing speaking, the Duke of Guise turned his head and looked at the silent Duke of Vendôme. I agree with you, the Duke. The Huguenots are indeed no longer a threat. It's time to show them some seriousness. The Duke of Vendôme glanced at the Duke of Guise, smiled, and said meaningfully in this regard. The Duke of Guise nodded to him, and also raised his lips meaningfully. Only the young adjutant was left alone, standing on the city wall in a daze, with a dazed expression on his face. Outside Moleseb, near the Huguenot barracks. In this era, where there are usually troops, there will be merchants following them. forming a temporary market for serving soldiers. Collecting spoils at a low price and then selling them at a high price can only be done by big businessmen with relatively rich net worth, and only they have the capital to operate. Ordinary small businessmen set up various shops, street stalls, cloth, clothing, shoes and socks, weapons, drinks, casinos, and brothels with a large number of delinquent women. These things are the daily needs of soldiers, so it is relatively lively in normal seasons. Danny is from Port Aris in the Aquitaine region. He is 18 years old this year, and he was born in a fisherman's family. He has short black hair, and his face, which has been tanned by the sea winds for a long time, is dark and dry, making him very conspicuous in the army. Holding 2 silver coins in his hand, Danny was in a daze for a moment. This was the most money he had received in a long time. Don Leon can see that since he was caught in the Protestant army for several months, he was either chased and beaten, or ran around, so there was no time to get extra money. But since this month, the situation has changed drastically. The Protestant liaison reversed the situation of being beaten in one fell swoop, and instead surrounded the Catholic allies. The Duke of Guise, who is well known in France, suddenly counterattacked in one fell swoop, which made Danny happy. This month, the city of Malesherbes was besieged, and the Protestant army was dispatched everywhere, looting the villages around Malesherbes. Everyone got benefits, even he, the fisherman's son, got 2 silver coins a month, which was the surplus of his family's annual income. Holding the 2 silver coins tightly, Danny happily walked out of the camp and came to the merchant tent area not far away. Along the way, there was an endless stream of soldiers, each with a radiant face, with a relaxed and lazy expression. Seeing everyone like this, Danny did the same. Such a day is so happy, more enjoyable and relaxing than fishing at home. I hope this kind of life will last forever. Not long after he entered the prosperous and crowded commercial street, he saw a group of disheveled women with little clothes on, revealing a large area of hungry and blushing skin, as well as the man's restless look. And from behind them, soldiers with their trousers in their hands kept coming out, smiling and greeting them. In this regard, Danny has made a decision that he will use half of his wealth to save these women who have lost their way. With excitement, Danny came to the side of the lost woman with a smile on his face, and when he was about to have a conversation, he suddenly heard a vibration in his ear. The sound was like a huge wave on the sea, making people tremble with fear, and Danny, who had been working for several months, was no longer that ignorant fisherman's son. His face suddenly turned pale and colorless. This is the sound of cavalry running, and it is a large number of cavalry that caused heavy casualties. He was not the only one who found out that all the soldiers who were shopping and lingering found this shocking news. A large wave of cavalry rushed towards them. This wave of cavalry came from the Paris area, but they went around to the rear of the Huguenots and charged directly. After all, there are still more supporters of the nobles of the Catholic allied forces. There are more than 10,000 people in the city, and they can immediately recruit thousands of cavalry to come to support. The Protestant army has been closely watching the Duke of Guise in the city, and the easy siege of the city for nearly a month has made the Protestant army relax a lot, and the cavalry from the rear caught them by surprise, completely unexpected. As a result, the cavalry who rushed from behind broke through their positions, and the Duke of Guise in the city saw the timing and went out of the city to attack. In less than half an hour, the Protestant army, which had a great advantage before, was immediately scattered. Soldiers at the bottom run around mindlessly, being trampled to death by cavalry, or killed by Catholic allies. The high-level officers could no longer command the soldiers under them, so they could only take some soldiers who could command them to evacuate urgently and flee in a hurry. 3 hours later, the original camp of the Protestant army was now in a mess, with flags, armor, corpses, blood, and war horses. In this battle, the Catholic allies won. Chapter 469 Reinforcement from England. After a battle, the situation in France suddenly changed. The Protestant League, which had greatly increased its advantages, lost most of its advantages at once. In this regard, the Protestant army suffered huge losses. Only more than 3,000 of them escaped, and the rest were either captured or killed. A large number of zizhong was left to the Catholic allies. More importantly, a large number of cities that the Protestants took the opportunity to acquire were all recovered by the Duke of Guise, and the situation in France returned to the hands of the Catholic allies. Now, as before, the Protestant army is besieging Orleans, changing positions in offense and defense. Moreover, the cities around the city of Orleans were also recovered by the Duke of Guise, and Orleans became an isolated city inside the city. Prince Condé looked out of the city and looked at the Catholic League showing off their might. Couldn't help gnashing their teeth. God can testify that he has always sent people to inspect the situation in the rear. and he has never been negligent, and the reason why he was raided by the cavalry a while ago must be that the patrol team had neglected their duties, which allowed the Catholic allies to steal a loophole, cooperate with the inside and outside, and smashed his camp in one fell swoop. It's not his fault. Tens of thousands of troops disappeared in a few hours. Can you not make him feel angry? Your Excellency, there is no need to do this. General Coligny looked blue, and his arms on the wall were trembling. It was obvious that he was in a hurry in this regard. For the sake of the entire Protestant army, Coligny could only comfort him softly. We have a lot of food in Orleans, and the siege of the Duke of Guise is of no use to us. Besides, the English have pacified the Normandy area. I think the British army will come to support them in a short time. We just need to stick to Orleans, for now. That's all I can do. Alice, Prince Condé looked at the bustling Catholic camp, and sighed helplessly. With endless hatred written on his face outside the city, the Duke of Guise also picked up the binoculars to look at the heavily guarded city of Orleans, and the smile on his face gradually faded away. It seems that Prince Condé is still good at defense, so don't underestimate him. The Duke of Guise glanced sideways at the Duke of Vendôme and said casually, yes, he has always been a leader in the army, and he is still good at fighting. It's a pity, the Duke of Vendôme said. It's a pity. He met me. The Duke of Guise said a little proudly. I think back then, even when he was fighting against the Spaniards, he was no match for me. Once, I beat the Spaniard, but he was always beaten, laughed at and couldn't hold his head up. But in Paris, in a blink of an eye, he changed his appearance again, showing off non-stop, bragging about his brilliant achievements to those ladies. It's really shameless. Speaking of this, the Duke of Guise gritted his teeth and said angrily, as if he had seen it on the spot regarding this. The Duke of Vendôme had a look of approval on his face, but he didn't quite agree with it in his heart. If it's not as expected, it's probably because of jealousy. When he was young, in Normandy, 3,000 British troops have been walking for hundreds of miles to support the Protestant coalition forces. The new army supported this time included 1,000 cavalry and 2,000 infantry, and the food and grass they brought was only 10 days' worth. Baron George, as the commander of the reinforcements, was responsible for commanding 3,000 British troops to support the Huguenots. Ding dong dong. Thousands of horses were moving forward together, and countless horseshoes trampled on the road, and the sound was endless. It was summer, and the roads became hard. A large number of horseshoes moved forward together, widening the original narrow roads in France, and with the wind, layers of dust were raised due to the capture of a lot of war horses, plus those purchased from Britain and France. In addition to the 1,000 cavalry who went to support this time, the other 2,000 infantry can also ride horses and become infantry. As the commander, Baron George, of course, would not ride in a carriage, but usually rode a horse like other cavalry, walking slowly. As for supporting Protestantism, he, like other British troops, has no interest in supporting Protestantism at all, especially the long-distance raid. This pain is too uncomfortable riding on a horse. Baron George fixed his body. Although his eyes were fixed on the front, his mind didn't know where he went. He still remembered the words of Alexander's earnest entrustment before leaving the city. For the Protestant army, don't treat them as allies. The first priority for you to go is to preserve your strength. The balance of the strength of the French is our main purpose. You have to play by ear. Therefore, Baron George felt that, given the current dominance of the Protestant coalition forces in France, he would just hang around in the past and consume the strength of the Protestants as much as possible. Just as he was thinking about it, a scout rushed over on his horse. His eyes lit up when he saw him, and he reined in and reported, "My lord, urgent news." The Protestant coalition forces were flanked by the Duke of Guise. They were defeated all the way and retreated to Orleans. Hearing this, Baron George frowned. Supporting a disadvantaged party, they certainly did not have a leisurely fantasy life, and it was shattered in this regard. He summoned messengers and ordered everyone to change their route and march. We can't pass through Paris directly. It's more important to go to Orleans. Pity. He is also going to take a look at the scenery of the first city in France. Thousands of troops immediately changed direction and chose a trail to walk again. 5 days later, an army of 3,000, full of dust and dust, arrived in Orleans after resting for a while. The army built a small military camp near the city of Orleans. For the city of Orleans, Baron George absolutely has no desire to enter because he knows that once he enters, it will be very difficult to get out. He didn't want the 3,000 people under him to be trapped to death inside, so that his responsibility would be great. Stationed outside the city, one can support Orleans, and the other is also convenient for them to talk and run. After all, there are 3,000 of them, and everyone has a horse. If they want to escape, it is easy. What? The English are coming, and their cavalry? Good. When Prince Condé heard that the reinforcements from England were coming, he immediately put down the bread in his hand and was extremely pleasantly surprised. Sitting in Orleans, he certainly understands the importance of reinforcements to Orleans, especially surrounded by famous generals like the Duke of Guise. The psychological pressure can be imagined. Immediately transfer a few pigs and sheep over there, and send someone to notify them, requesting to cooperate with their actions. It seems that her plan may be implemented. Prince Condé was very happy with the arrival of the British army. This not only meant hope, but also meant that he had planned a counter-offensive plan for many days, and it was possible to implement it, thus turning defeat into victory. What? The English are here? Unlike the happy Prince Condé, the Duke of Guise had identified expression. Since he was defeated by the English last time, he has treated the English differently, more than the Protestant army. Chapter 470 Shelling. Because the English arranged the camp near Orleans, the Duke of Guise was unable to gather all the troops to attack Orleans. The Catholic allies, who were unable to concentrate all their strength, naturally had no choice but to shrink into a fist. And the Huguenots, who had boosted their morale in this way, under the scorching sun, the Catholic allies and the Huguenots were engaged in an arduous siege and defense battle. The Huguenot faction was short of troops. Even though the Duke of Guise did not use all his strength, Prince Condé still dispatched all his troops to resist, which was quite difficult, and the Catholic allies were also suffering. Even with a large number of troops, some troops are still allocated to defend the English, and they cannot use their full strength. This feeling was extremely uncomfortable for the Duke of Guise. Enemy from the front and rear, although but not far away. Another week later, the Protestant army and the Catholic army went up and down the city of Orleans, leaving a total of nearly 3,000 corpses. The number of other disabled people is hard to estimate. The city of Orleans has become a black hole, devouring life constantly, and showing no sign of satisfaction. The quaint city walls, the original stained blood has not yet dried up, but at this time new blood has been added, forming one after another blood scabs. The original gray-black color has now turned red-black. If you look carefully, you will also find that there are many human organs left on the uneven surface of the city wall. Teeth, bones, long hair, nails, and even withered and deformed ears are creepy to look at. The moat under the city wall has long been filled with corpses and mud, and it has changed from a muddy black river to land composed of corpses and mud. It is expected that by next year, this place will become fertile soil. Boris stood on the city wall and watched as the Catholic allies dragged his own body back, and sent some old, weak, sick and disabled to come close to the city wall to collect armor and arrows. Holding the spear with his right hand, his left hand drilled into his back, stretched out his hand to scratch. And the long nails kept scratching up and down. After a while, he felt that he had grabbed something with his left hand, and when he put it in front of his eyes, it turned out to be a tooth, which was black and exuded a rancid smell. Boris quickly threw it away, then patted his left hand to shake off the mud under the nails, and then rubbed vigorously, as if he wanted to get rid of the bad luck in his hand. Shrinking his head, Boris felt that his face and the back of his neck were red and hot from the sun. Sweat was already dripping from his forehead and neck unstoppably. The rough and inferior linen clothes were soaked in sweat and stuck tightly to his body, making him uncomfortable. Damn the sun! Boris swore softly, watching the Catholic allies receding like water. He stared down again boredly, watching the hard-working old, weak, sick and disabled, secretly picking up the arrows on the ground, and then accidentally being shot by the city wall archers. Shoot at the same time. Taking advantage of this leisure time, the veterans on the city wall boredly bet on which picker would be shot next. The veterans, like him, stared at the bottom of the city wall with amusement, their eyes fixed while they were enjoying this moment of leisure. Suddenly there was a loud noise from afar, and exclamations came from around them. Run away! Run away! Boris couldn't figure out why there was the word flee. They were on the city wall, but the Catholic allies didn't attack, so what were they afraid of? But he looked up suspiciously. In front of him, dozens of huge stones drew an arc in the air, and then quickly magnified in his eyes. Only then did he realize that the enemy had already used artillery. It's a pity that the stones came straight towards him as if they had eyes, and directly smashed his whole body against the city wall. Before he could react and move his footsteps, he was smashed into blood cake, and he went to see God. Not only him, but even the other soldiers who joined in the fun were also rubbed by stones, dragged and rubbed on the ground, dripping with blood, staining the entire city wall. And the original black was red, and others didn't dare to look at the corpses. They couldn't die anymore. The most important thing at the moment was defense. The Protestant soldiers were soon instructed to stay on the city wall and not to move. Therefore, on the city wall, the soldiers shrank their heads, glanced down from time to time, and then hid behind the wall, cowering for the whole morning. The entire city of Orleans was spent in the roar of uninterrupted artillery fire. Although the casualties caused were not large, it sapped the confidence in the city of Orleans. Huge boulders outside the city were continuously thrown into the city, destroying many houses and sending many people to meet God. Although the residents in Orleans had recovered a lot under the comfort of the priest, they were still in a trance and anxious. The soldiers on the top of the city are even more so. They hide under the wall, trembling, and waited in fear for the arrival of the boulder flying from outside the city. At some point, they were hit, and went to see God in a bloody mess. In such a conservative situation, the process of waiting for death greatly drained their morale. After all, when someone beats you and you can't beat others, it is impossible to expect this group of troops, which are mostly composed of farmers and soldiers, to withstand the psychological trauma. At noon, Prince Condé personally inspected the city wall. Noticing the low morale of the soldiers defending the city, he frowned. Morale is something that cannot be lost, so he gritted his teeth, killed a few pigs and sheep, made meat soup, and rewarded the hard-working soldiers. Furthermore, he invited some Huguenot priests to come up to comfort the fragile hearts of these wounded soldiers. Moreover, he also ordered the artillerymen, who had been suppressed all morning and couldn't lift their heads, to return the stones that flew into the city with only 3 or 4 artillery pieces. Although this is not as good as the Catholic Allied forces, it got rid of the passive beating situation and gave the Protestant army some extra psychological comfort. After using these methods, Prince Condé finally stopped his morale from falling, and he finally breathed a sigh of relief. This is the difference between famous generals and ordinary generals. You can find out where the problems in the military are at once, and try to solve them as much as possible. In the afternoon, the Catholic allies started a new round of bombing operations, and Orleans also made limited counterattacks. The little girl who seemed to be molested by everyone resisted helplessly a few times, but there was a bigger round of attacks. This time the infantry and artillery coordinated operations, which caught Orleans by surprise. Chapter 471 Orleans in danger. The artillery bombarded the front, and the infantry behind began to attack the city. For the city of Orleans, it was really a disaster. In desperation, enduring the boulders above their heads, the Protestant soldiers, encouraged by the priests, began to bravely show their heads and fight back against the Catholic soldiers who had ascended the city for a time. The entire city of Orleans was busy. Ordinary strong men and women kept sending stones and hot oil to the city wall as auxiliary soldiers, but the Catholic soldiers under the city wall, with fanatical expressions on their faces, climbed the long ladder under the cover of the boulder, going up step by step. Some people were wearing thin leather armor, tall, or holding a small wooden shield, and then rushed upwards desperately, scaring the guards with their indomitable momentum. And most of them were wearing thin clothes, yellow and thin, holding a smooth long spear. Tremblingly followed the group of strong soldiers, and climbed up the city wall step by step. At the same time, a few hundred steps away from the city gate, a gigantic 5-person high collision car slowly moved forward with a huge siege weapon. I saw that there were 4 wheels covered with iron sheets under it, and then a huge wooden pillar was erected on the car, which was as thick as a person's waist and 5 meters long. One of the ends is sharp and wrapped with iron sheets. The wood is tied with circles of grass ropes, and the middle part is hung by iron chains. Over there the sharp side is facing the city gate, and the soldiers behind are constantly swinging and bumping back and forth. If the time is not limited, the iron city gate will not be able to resist at this kind of huge collision, because it is too simple. Was learned by the Europeans from the Ottoman Empire, and the Arabs learned it from the Mongols, although the invention of the mortar almost made it useless. However, the city wall of Orleans was constantly being built, and the artillery alone was not enough to collapse it. The city gate became the only breakthrough, and the car crash entered the stage of history again. Under the push of the soldiers, they moved towards the city gate step by step from the uneven ground. In this way, when the archers on the city wall saw this big killer, they could no longer take care of so many soldiers attacking the city, and hurriedly drew their bows to shoot them, trying to shoot down the soldiers who were passing by, thus making the chariot a waste product. However, although there were soldiers falling down with arrows, pouring out a lot of blood to soak the ground, and bringing a few howls, there was no delay in catching this huge siege weapon. As soon as one fell down, 2 other soldiers were forced to run over behind them, and continued to come to the side of the car, pushing desperately even though arrows rained down constantly around them and above their heads. These soldiers were not affected in the slightest. Even though their comrades around them kept falling down, they still pushed forward a huge and shocking crash unswervingly. Step by step to the gate of Orleans, and just behind, the Duke of Guise was holding a telescope, watching the balance of war constantly tilting towards him, and a smile appeared in the corner of his eyes. It seems that the city of Orleans will be back in our hands in a short time. This is really a pleasant day, even if he stayed in the pergola, but felt the wanton heat of the sun. King Navarre and Duke Vendôme, His Excellency Antoine de Bourbon, felt that his body was about to evaporate, so there was no joy to speak of, but the news that the war was about to end did drive away a lot of enthusiasm for him. He suppressed his irritability and said in agreement, "Indeed, the Huguenots are about to disappear in France, and the heresy in France is about to disappear. I am afraid that today I will be blessed by the Almighty Lord. Amen, amen." The devout Catholic Duke of Guise also made a prayer gesture after hearing the words, and then looked at King Navarre and the Duke of Vendôme aside, and said viciously, "From today on behalf of my lord, I will severely punish these betrayers and these hateful heretics. Only by returning to hell can they return to the light of the world, and let the glory of our Lord shine on France again." Hearing such a naked, lewd declaration of terror, the Duke of Vendôme, who has always been a centrist, shivered. Looking at the fierce battle ahead, he couldn't help but sigh. Compared with a massacre in the future, the war at this time is probably nothing more than this. Under the scorching sun, soldiers on both sides are still fighting bloody battles. One side mustered up the courage, and under the encouragement of religion and materialism, with red eyes, repeatedly climbed the city and climbed the wall, and even pushed and crashed the car in one go, regardless of the casualties, trying to break through the city that had blocked them for many days as the defensive side. The Huguenot soldiers looked even more tragic. The spiritual encouragement of the priest, as if needless to say, is definitely not comparable in material terms. The reason that can support them so persistently without collapse is the violent attack of the Catholic allies. Even if the generals did not make any publicity, they could still understand that the city of Orleans, which had entered the Catholic allied forces for so long, would be massacred to vent the desire of the Catholic soldiers. Most of them are either from the city of Orleans, or they are located in the cities and villages near the city of Orleans, and they deeply understand the consequences of the destruction of the city of Orleans. Moreover, Prince Condé did not hesitate to publicize it, which made their fearful hearts even more frightened in this way. The powerful power of fear and the responsibility to protect their families made them explode with great strength. Just as the war was leaning towards the Catholic allies, the English soldiers on the side were also besieged. In order to concentrate his forces to attack the city of Orleans, the Duke of Guise used a lot of people's power overnight. Around the English camp, large pits were dug one after another, as well as countless small pits and depressions, and some traps were also arranged, and a low wall only knee-high was built to stop them from attacking. Moreover, the Duke of Guise was not at ease, and still sent more than 2,000 infantry soldiers to guard them, or it could be said to delay them just to have time to break through the city of Orleans. Baron George stood tall in the camp, squinting his eyes, looking at the large and small potholes in front of him, as well as the wounded and howling soldiers in front of him, with a serious expression on his face. If these potholes are filled regardless of the damage, it will take a day, and there are more than 2,000 guard soldiers to beware of in 2 days. Their 3,000 people might not be able to support the city of Orleans, so I'm afraid the Duke of Guise is attacking Orleans regardless of any damage. Baron George looked at the city of Orleans, which was under fire in the distance, and thought in a depressed mood, so wouldn't my trip be in vain? Chapter 472 Sudden Assassination. The sun in the sky is very face-saving, trying its best to shine light and heat on the earth, but the two sides above and below the city of Orleans don't appreciate it. The hot weather added a lot of difficulties to this war. Even if the soldiers of Orleans City have invested a lot of energy, they still cannot stop the gradual fall of Orleans City. In particular, the firing of a large number of artillery pieces and the desperate attack of the Catholic soldiers almost killed them. The city wall, which was originally restored and relatively smooth, is now full of potholes, and the sackcloth on the faces of ordinary people looks very ugly from a distance. Most importantly, the city gate, which had been safe before, suffered huge losses at this time. The huge crash took more than 3 hours, and after killing and injuring hundreds of people, it finally came to the gate of the city. The city gate of Orleans is made of thick wood, covered with a layer of iron sheet, which is black and shiny, and looks very strong. It is not as tall and wide as in China, but it is very narrow and short. Although Orleans has a good geographical location, its original intention of building the city was not for business, but as a fortress. Although the citizens later won the right to autonomy, the city gates and the city pool remained unchanged, and the merchants still endured the queuing and slow pace. But at this time, the narrow city gate was very useful during the war, and the heavy city gate became a difficulty. However, in the face of such difficulties, The soldiers beside him, and even the Duke of Guise, who was in command behind him, still did not give up and came to break through at all costs. So, after paying the price of almost every second of casualties, after half an hour of impact, the Gate of Orleans finally came to an end and completed its own mission under the continuous impact of the collision. The heavy and narrow city gate revealed a gap, which was as wide as a human head. In this way, the morale of the soldiers who pushed the crashed cars was greatly increased, and they exhausted their strength to expand the results of the battle. At the same time, the city of Orleans kept falling, like hailstones, in an endless stream. Boom. Boom. The sound of the human body falling down was louder and more terrifying than hailstones. Corpses fell from under the city, and some of them burst open directly. The blood seemed to be free of money, spreading layer after layer, and recoloring the land that was originally dyed black. And brown human heads, arms, thighs, and even spears, shields, and arrows were all moistened by fire oil, and under the city, they burned piece by piece, which was difficult to extinguish on a hot moon day. The sun scorching was not enough. Coupled with the intensification of some fires, the soldiers on both sides were sweating profusely, and a large area was wet on their bodies, and they didn't know whether it was sweat or blood. In the rear position, the Duke of Guise stared intently at the front. He didn't even care about the messy beard, and the rest of his body was on the city of Orleans. Hurry up and inform. After the victory of the siege, we will plunder for 3 days, and the first climber, if he survives, will be a knight. Whoever takes down any nobleman or even an officer will be rewarded with 10 gold coins. No one is allowed to retreat, and anyone who retreats without authorization will be killed by the gendarmerie. A series of reward or punishment orders popped out of the Duke of Guise's mouth one by one, and the orderly was so busy that he was sweating that he couldn't take a sip of water. How about the English? Duke Guise frowned, as if remembering something, and asked, "My lord, the English side is slowly filling the hole. In less than 2 days, I'm afraid they will all come out." Hearing this, the Duke of Vendôme couldn't help laughing. The flesh on his face twitched. It seemed that he couldn't help it. "Thanks to Mr. Morris from Paris for giving us advice, otherwise we would not have thought of such a good method, and more importantly, he also sent us a lot of food, which solved our food shortage problem." After the siege for more than a month, the city of Orleans still had enough food and grass, but the more than 10,000 Catholic allied forces were eating horses and chewing horses, and their food had bottomed out. As he spoke, the Duke of Guise pointed to a restless middle-aged man, dressed as a businessman, cowering in the corner, but at a glance, he was a shrewd and smooth businessman. "This is what I should do." The businessman touched the smooth scalp on the top of his head, and said with a smile and a little nervousness, "As devout Catholics, we should do what we can to deal with these heresies." The Duke of Guise squinted at his sly smile, smiled slightly, and said kindly, "Mr. Morris, for your service to the royal family in our Lord, after the city of Orleans is captured, I recommend you to His Majesty the King. The Baron cannot run away." In this regard, Morris immediately showed a surprised expression, and quickly bent down 90 degrees, his forehead almost touched the ground, and quickly thanked him. Then he walked to the corner consciously, without looking at him. On the other hand, the Duke of Vendôme looked on coldly. He was not happy for a merchant to become a nobleman, but using a court baron to alleviate the food shortage was also a last resort at this time. News suddenly came from the front that the city gate was broken. In this way, a smile appeared on the Duke of Guise's face, and the victory was assured. After the city gate was breached, even though the opening was blocked, it was much more convenient when it came to reason. Moreover, this was a real blow to the morale of Orleans City. It can be said that victory is in sight. Sure enough, not long after the city gate was breached, many Catholic troops climbed up on the top of the city. Then, like ants, the Catholic army quickly nibbled away at the city of Orleans and gradually suppressed the Huguenots. The soldiers behind also climbed up quickly, and then the number accumulated to a certain number. Before the city gate was cleared, the head of the city of Orleans was already occupied by the Catholic army. In this way, the Duke of Guise and the Duke of Vendôme in the headquarters immediately walked out, and under the support of the guards, they led the remaining 2,000 soldiers and gave the city of Orleans a final blow. At this time, the businessman from Paris quietly changed into a cavalry armor while watching His Excellency the Duke move forward, and followed the Duke of Guise silently. Half an hour later, the Catholic soldiers at the head of the city went down to the city, and the Huguenot soldiers who were still guarding the gate cooperated with the Catholic soldiers in front of the gate, and the gate was opened at this time. The Duke of Guise and the Duke of Vendôme rode in front and entered the city of Orleans proudly, looking at the Duke of Guise about 10 meters in front of him. The Parisian businessman Maurice took out a cylinder from his pocket and pointed it at the Duke of Guise in front of him. When the city gate was dark, He narrowed his eyes, calmed down, puffed up his mouth, aimed at the Duke of Guise's neck, swayed his heart, and blew hard whoosh. The sound of piercing the air was covered by the shouts, and a short finger-length arrow directly hit the Duke of Guise. His Excellency the Duke was opening his mouth, happily chatting with the Duke of Vendôme beside him, when he suddenly felt a chill in his neck. Then he rolled his eyes, revealing the whites of his eyes, and fell straight off the horse. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 473: The Death of the Duke of Guise. After the fall of the Duke of Guise, the Parisian businessman got off his horse vigorously, and then took off the thin layer of leather armor on his body with lightning speed under the dark light, and then casually grabbed it from the ground. With a handful of dirt, he painted his face black as if nothing had happened. He picked up a rag and put it on his body, and then picked up a broken gun. He still looked like a businessman in front. The fall of the Duke of Guise shocked the knights around him. Their faces were pale, and their legs, which were holding the horse's belly, were all slack. My God, this is absolutely impossible. These words flashed in the hearts of all the knights. Those who can follow the Duke of Guise are local nobles and young noble knights. Their knowledge is much better than those soldiers whose heads are full of excrement. Frequently active brains told them that the Duke of Guise was the most powerful general in the Catholic League and the most prestigious natural leader. His departure caused the entire Catholic League to lose almost half of its strength, especially at this critical moment of seizing the city. It is the most dangerous. Everyone stop. The Duke of Vendôme on the side immediately dismounted, inspected the wound of the Duke of Guise, tried breathing through his nostrils again, and looked at the expectant and flustered eyes gathered around him. He didn't seem to notice the wound on the Duke's neck and the bleeding all over the place, and said firmly and resolutely, "Immediately find a carriage." His Excellency was just overworked and passed out from the horse. Now he urgently needs to rest. You continue to attack and drive the group of heretics out of Orleans as the King of Navarre and the Duke of Vendôme, Antoine immediately ordered without changing his expression, and the aura of a superior came to his face regarding this. The other knights and nobles took a look at the Duke of Guise, who looked like a corpse, and remained motionless, even though they were quite sure that the Duke was dead. But seeing the Duke of Vendôme's face, they quickly adjusted, agreed immediately, and shut their mouths tightly under Antoine's scrutinizing gaze. The knights and nobles tacitly manipulated the horses, and according to the established plan, began to eliminate the Huguenot soldiers who were still entrenched in the city. The dignified Duke of Vendôme took the fainted Duke of Guise to the original camp outside the city, putting the Duke of Guise on the bed. The blood flowed down from his neck unstoppably, soaking the entire bed sheet and staining his beautiful silk clothes. It looked horrible. The Duke of Vendôme sat aside, watching the doctors of the army examine the Duke of Guise with a worried face, and sighed non-stop. The Duke of Vendôme glanced at the Duke of Guise. His face was sad, but his mind was churning non-stop. As the deputy commander in name, after the Duke of Guise passed away, he could justifiably become the commander of the army. Coupled with the prestige of capturing the city of Orleans, the largest army of the Catholic League was in his hands. Moreover, he is also nominally the deputy regent of France, and his status is only under Queen Catherine. If you add the army, after the Huguenots are wiped out, becoming the helm of France is no longer a dream. Regaining consciousness, the Duke of Vendôme instructed the doctor with a look of concern. The Catholic soldiers originally thought that after laying down the city gates and attacking Orleans, they might loot, burn, kill, rape, prostitution, and do whatever they want. Who would have thought that when they were about to be happy, that group of nasty Huguenot soldiers did not raise their hands to surrender, but instead used a large number of houses one by one to start counterattacking. Little by little they either shot a few shots and ran away, or dozens of them shot together, so that their happy mood suddenly turned bad, like eating shit. In this way, they no longer thought about being happy, and it was more important to eliminate the Huguenots first. In this way, the Catholic army, which was able to advance slowly in the city of Orleans, no longer disturbed the people, and the resistance of ordinary citizens was much weaker. And they also concentrated their efforts to eliminate the Huguenots at once, and the speed of progress immediately accelerated. Prince Condé, who was in command of the city hall, frowned when he received the news of the rapid advance of the Catholic soldiers in His Excellency's plan. After the city gate fell, soldiers were immediately organized to resist one by one, relying on houses and favorable terrain, and slowly consumed these Catholic soldiers' familiar terrain. Solid support from the masses, and firm beliefs all became the source of confidence in Prince Condé's heart. Only by consuming more than half of these Catholic soldiers will they have the next chance to breathe. The entire city of Orleans is very large, and all the troops are broken up into pieces, which is very troublesome to command. But Prince Condé didn't feel bored at all. Instead, he commanded meticulously, and just near the window of the headquarters, a young man with long brown hair and conspicuous dark blue eyes was staring at the sky tightly without blinking. It seems that the busy headquarters and the messenger have nothing to do with him. Suddenly, a firework burst out of the white sky. Although the brightness was not very conspicuous, he still caught it. A hint of surprise suddenly appeared on his icy face, and then quickly expanded. The whole face turned into a chrysanthemum. With a smile, he immediately ran to Prince Condé and said impatiently, "Your Excellency, I have something important to report to you." Prince Condé ignored him, and continued to give orders to the messenger carefully. After a few minutes, after the English waited impatiently, he turned his head and asked calmly, "Mr. Ives, what made you disturb me regardless of etiquette? I hope this is good news." Hearing the serious voice of Prince Condé, he restrained his smile and reported solemnly, "Your Excellency, I just got the news that the Duke of Guise has died. The cause of death is unknown." "Oh? Is this true?" Prince Condé immediately stood up excitedly and asked impatiently, "Of course, it's true news. The Duke of Guise is dead. The current Catholic soldiers look very powerful, but they are just a long snake that lost its head. It's just a struggle after death. Please be sure of your answer, Englishman." Containing some excited expressions, Prince Condé asked again, "You know, if your news is wrong, what will happen? I can't care about the King of England who is thousands of miles away." Faced with the questioning of such a powerful person, the Englishman swallowed his mouth, and replied with unusual affirmation, "By God's witness, I swear that if what I say is false, I will die and go to hell." Glancing at the Englishman in front of him, Prince Condé closed his eyes, thought for a while, and then said a word, "England, I will trust you for a while. I hope it is true." Only then did Elvis relax, and his tense body relaxed. Who would have thought that the majesty of the superior is so terrifying? Even more terrifying than Boscaham. Subsequently, Prince Condé sent people everywhere to spread the news of the Duke of Guise's death. For a while, the morale of the Huguenot soldiers was boosted, while the Catholic soldiers on the other side were dubious. In this way, after a few hours, the higher-ups only refuted the rumor that the Duke was fine, but the Duke of Guise did not show up for a long time, making most of the soldiers believe the rumor of his death. As a result, on the second day, the Catholic soldiers lost their fighting spirit and were driven out of the city of Orleans by their morale. Chapter 474 London Stock Exchange. London in August is in a muggy and hot weather. Even if there is a little drizzle in the sky from time to time, it still cannot relieve the irritability of London's citizens. There are 5 major exchanges in London, and the exchange in the city is also called the Exchange in the City because it is located around Westminster Abbey and the city government, and it is surrounded by the famous aristocratic and wealthy businessmen in London, coupled with the prosperity of business. Noble Exchange, as the name suggests, the amount and number of transactions are larger than those of the other 4 exchanges, and the buyers are quieter, gentlemen, and not impatient to do business at all. On this day, there was a drizzle in the sky, but inside the Noble Exchange, people didn't care at all, and there were still people coming and going, each doing their own thing. It's just that today, the atmosphere in the exchange is extremely dull, or in other words, getting more and more dull. Most of the buyers who come and go have serious faces and frowns, and they all look like others owe them millions of pounds. I knew I was in a bad mood when I went up. Even the guard standing guard at the door had a stern face, without the gentle and respectful smile of the past. In front of the exchange, a leather-covered carriage stopped in front of the exchange, causing a splash of rainwater on the floor tiles at the door. The carriage was parked firmly, and it looked like an old driver. The large carriage was pulled by 2 horses. The surface was hollowed out and carved with a large number of beautiful patterns. A well-dressed groom sat high in front, pulling the reins. The doorman smiled immediately, took out an umbrella from behind, and walked over to support the people in the carriage, while the other moved a chair as a footstep. Although he understands that this is a rented carriage, and the people inside are probably not nobles, so these are what he has to do. The nobles and the rich don't need him to do it at all, and the servants have already taken care of them. The action of serving has been deeply engraved in my mind, and I will not wait because of the identity of the guests. Attentive service is a must inside the carriage. A well-dressed young man in his 20s, with short black hair and a hint of excitement and nervousness on his face, appeared to be a novice. He got out of the carriage a little uncomfortable, hid under the umbrella held by the guard, and looked curiously at the magnificent and gorgeous exchange in front of him at this time. Another person came out from behind him, with short light blonde hair and tight-fitting clothes. There was no tension on his face, but he seemed to be taking it for granted, enjoying the service. "Richard, come with me." The buff and indifferent man behind came out later, but he naturally looked like a leader, and ordered proudly and the brown man seemed to be shocked by the beautiful exchange. After hearing the order, he slowed down, hid under the umbrella, and walked over with the guard. Soon after walking a few steps, the two came to the exchange, no longer needing to hide from the rain. After arriving at the destination, the buff man immediately took out a silver coin from his wallet and threw it into the hands of two guards, leaving behind two guards who bowed, and then brought Richard, who was nervous, behind him to the exchange. The nervous Richard followed behind the buff man, step by step, looking around with curiosity on his face. "Bowen, the noble exchange really lives up to its reputation," Richard exclaimed. "That's it." Bowen, who was leading the way, immediately replied, then realized something was wrong, turned his head, and whispered beside him, "The people who come and go here are either aristocrats or well-known businessmen in London, and everyone's net worth is no less than £10,000, so don't make loud noises here, and don't look around. Remember, we're buyers on the exchange at the moment. Pay attention to identity." This sentence is of course an exaggeration, but it is not a lie that the people who come and go are all wealthy gentlemen. After teaching his cousin a lesson, the man named Bowen immediately changed into confident appearance. With his well-dressed appearance, he looked like a big shot and Richard, who was like a younger brother, nodded immediately. Even though he was wearing noble clothes, his civilian temperament was undoubtedly revealed. A few well-dressed gentlemen passing by frowned quickly, gave him a disgusted look, and then left quickly. Richard closely followed his well-developed cousin Bowen, secretly looking around. The surprise in his eyes couldn't stop immediately. Under his curiosity, his cousin Bowen didn't go to the crowded and busy hall with non-stop transactions, but took a detour, walked to a side path, and came to a side hall. In the side hall, there were only a few dozens of people, and the names of a dozen large companies were written on the blackboard in front of the hall. As for the dozens of people in the side hall, they looked even more serious than the so many buyers in the hall with bitter faces, and they looked like they could eat people. When Richard saw this, he was in a panic. So he could only follow closely behind his cousin and stop looking around. Bowen in front of him walked steadily, with a look of calmness, as if he had really developed. With a face full of confidence, he came to the big blackboard in the center of the side hall, and looked at the young man holding chalk without looking at him. On top of that, United Kingdom government bonds, and some corporate bonds selling French land purchase notes. Since part of the land in France was occupied by England, many nobles and wealthy businessmen used this to set up land companies, sell bonds, and then use the money from the bond sales to buy land from the military using contacts. The land was bought at a low price, and if the British Army won in the end, it was sold at a high price, and the corporate bond was the guarantee for the company's future income. But now, it's all about French bonds. The French Protestant situation is unfavorable, and the city of Orleans has been besieged for more than a month. Of course, these buyers have serious expressions. If the Protestant situation is unfavorable, the Normandy and Brittany regions occupied by the British Army will be in danger. Naturally, the prices of these corporate and government bonds have fallen significantly. Seeing that the atmosphere in the side hall was not quite right, and seeing that the prices of these corporate bonds were about to break through the reserve price, Bowen chuckled lightly and swaggered to the sales window. "Give me £1,000 in government bonds and other French land company bonds." Looking at the salesperson in a daze at the window, Bowen suddenly felt extremely happy. What? Is this man sick? The situation in France is unclear. How could anyone dare to buy bonds in a big way? I'm afraid they got hit on the head. Hey! Another fool who barged in regardless. The other gentlemen who were frowning at the side were amazed to see Bowen buying £1,000 bond in such a reckless manner. Fortunately, everyone is a gentleman, so they will not make a lot of noise. Although Bowen didn't hear clearly, he felt that none of the words were good. He felt that it was a bit embarrassing for him to pretend to be aggressive this time, and he lost face a lot. Chapter 475, Message Delivery. Feeling that the atmosphere was a bit awkward, Bowen immediately reacted and wanted to end this embarrassing scene. "Hurry up, please. I'm in a hurry." Hearing the prompt sound from the customer, the salesperson was taken aback for a moment, and then he reacted, smiled quickly, and said, "Sorry, sir, please forgive my rudeness." The young salesperson apologized quickly, and immediately ordered the people beside him to get things, smiling softly. "Please wait a moment, because the quantity you requested is a bit large. Let us go find it." The gentlemen around him glanced at him lightly, smiled contemptuously, and left on their own. It's not worth staying for a stranger, their time is still precious. Helpless, after people said so, he could only helplessly sit on the waiting chair and wait slowly. Furthermore, I heard that the investors behind the noble exchange include the royal family and the Duke of Norfolk. As a new small businessman, he can't afford to offend him in this way. After waiting for a while, Bowen handed a check from the Bank of England marked as £1,000 to the salesman through the window. After some inspections, Bowen finally got a stack of beautiful white paper coupons, more than 50 coupons, about the thickness of a palm, with special patterns on the edges of the paper, which looked very high-end. Bowen, are you ready? His cousin Richard came over nervously, looked at the paper in Bowen's hand, and said in surprise. Richard never imagined that £1,000 could be exchanged for a stack of papers, which is too exaggerated. Let's go. In a few days, I'm going to get rich. Bowen took his cousin Richard and left the exchange. As soon as he came out, he sighed with joy. But it's nothing to worry about. You don't understand this stuff now, but you'll understand it in a few days. Bowen seemed to know what he was going to ask, interrupted his cousin's question, and said with a smile, seeing his cousin leading the way ahead. Richard followed behind and asked suspiciously, "Why don't you make a car when you go back?" Hearing this, Bowen immediately turned his head and slapped him on the back of the head, and the crisp sound resounded immediately. "You boy, don't you need money to rent a car? I'll go back in a public carriage later." Richard looked at his cousin walking ahead contentedly, with a look of grievance on his face. Didn't his cousin get rich? Why are you so stingy? Bowen was walking in front, watching the gorgeous carriages passing by from the corner of the eye. He couldn't help casting envious eyes. "Fortunately, my friend works in the Dark Blade, and by spending some silver coins, I can get the information a little earlier. It seems that reselling bonds is the real way to get rich." At this moment, Bowen made up his mind. With the development of the United Kingdom's economy, more and more people began to pay attention to the new bond trading, and their desire to get rich overnight made them flock to it. When Bowen heard the news, Knight Guyham of the Dark Blade rushed to the palace with a hint of joy. His steps were a little frivolous and unsteady. "Please report to His Majesty the King. Just say that I have something important to report. It is very urgent." As soon as he saw the expression on the secretary's face, Guyham knew what he was going to say, so he interrupted him quickly and said quickly. Hearing this, the secretary frowned, and held back the reprimand that he had blurted out. After all, the one in front of him was the leader of Dark Blade, one of the kingdom's two major intelligence organizations. Great power, very different from those officials and ordinary nobles. "Please wait a moment, I will report to His Majesty right now." The secretary glanced at him, said angrily, then turned and left. Guyham looked at the secretary's attitude, frowned slightly, and then calmed down again. Years of self-restraint made him calm down. After all, the secretary in front of him was always by the king's side, and it was better not to offend him as much as possible. Soon, the secretary walked in front of him, his expression relaxed, and he said, "Your Majesty, please come in." "Thank you," Guyham said softly before walking in. "Your Majesty." Guyham knocked on the door. "Come in." A crisp and tired voice sounded beside Guyham's ears. "Let's talk. There is something important that needs to be reported personally by you, the leader. Hope is good news." In front of him, a young man in his 20s had his legs resting on the desk, his back leaning against the seat, and the voice came from his mouth. Guyham looked up and saw that the king in front of him had a pair of deep blue eyes, like a deep blue spring, bottomless, possessing the magic power to tempt people to explore. A head of long brown hair was casually draped behind his head, with a short beard on his lips, a high nose bridge, and a face like a crown jade, with a handsome appearance. Seeing his tired look, Guyham didn't care at all, and still said calmly, "Your Majesty, there's news from France that the Operation Scarlet has been successfully completed." Looking at the head of the intelligence agency in front of him, His Majesty Edward squinted his eyes, looked at his long gray hair, and his slightly stooped body, feeling a little embarrassed in his heart. "This is indeed good news." The young king immediately stood up and said a little excitedly. Edward approached the map on the wall, staring at the yellow map of France, closely staring at the Normandy and Brittany regions. He stretched out his hand and painted Brittany and Normandy in red, which belonged to the United Kingdom, and painted the western coastal area of France in red. His Majesty the King nodded proudly. "As long as the French coastal area is occupied, then everything will be a matter of course. Cutting off the territory of the French Atlantic coast is equivalent to cutting off the French colonial road. In this way, France can only accompany the Ottoman Empire and swim in the Mediterranean Sea." Ha ha ha. Thinking of the beauty, the young king couldn't help laughing. "Monsieur Knight, Said His Majesty the King. Yes, Your Majesty. Guyham quickly replied, please use the Dark Blades transmission channel to send a message to Knight Alexander. Don't act rashly, and don't care about any agreements. Maintaining the interests of the kingdom is the most important thing. Looking at Guyham, His Majesty the King said shamelessly, without any blush in the eyes of the king, the so-called agreement signed with the French Huguenots was nothing more than a temporary combination of interests. Now that the Duke of Guise has been assassinated and killed, the strength of the Catholic League has been greatly reduced, and it is even very likely that they will be oppressed by the Huguenots in this way. The agreement has no meaning of existence, and the interest relationship has ended. Next, what the United Kingdom needs to consider is how to face the complicated political situation in France. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.